Welcome back to Grimoire Audiobooks, Magical Beings. The moment you've all been waiting for is here. We continue with part 2 of Make a Wish by Rorschach's Blot, and trust me, the twists keep getting darker and more unpredictable. Harry's wish has set in motion a chain of events that no one, not even him, can control. What's the true cost of getting what you desire most? Let's find out in today's chapter. Disclaimer. Before we dive in, a quick reminder. This fanfiction is a transformative work based on J.K. Rowling's Harry Potter series. All original characters, settings, and trademarks belong to their respective owners. This reading is created purely for entertainment, with no copyright infringement intended. In part 1, we saw Harry make a wish that would change everything he knew about magic, time, and fate. Now, in part 2, the consequences of his wish begin to unravel. Make a Wish is a deep dive into the darker, more philosophical side of magic. Rorschach's Blot masterfully weaves a narrative that explores the fine line between wishful thinking and harsh reality. The world is turning in unexpected ways, and Harry is right in the middle of it. As we continue to eagerly await the Harry Potter series on HBO Max, stories like Make a Wish remind us of the endless possibilities in the wizarding world. This story shines a light on what happens when one person's choices ripple outwards, changing the very fabric of the magical universe. It's the perfect example of how fans continue to bring fresh perspectives to the Potterverse. Rorschach's Blot is a writer known for their sharp insight into human nature and their ability to turn the most beloved characters upside down. With Make a Wish, they explore the consequences of ambition and the unexpected price of power. This author's work always leaves you questioning what's next and provides a fresh lens through which to view the wizarding world. So sit back, relax, and get ready for the next chapter of Make a Wish by Rorschach's Blot. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss the next magical adventure. Let's jump in. Make a Wish by Rorschach's Blot. 11. Splat. Quiet night. One of the watchers commented to his partner. You think that anything will happen? Nah. Everybody is well aware of our neutrality. There is no way that. He trailed off, and the two of them stared blankly at the pile of dead men in black robes that had appeared in front of them. I suspect that now would be a good time to call for backup. I suspect it would, the other agreed. Do you think that Black would refrain from killing anybody else if we asked him nicely? Can't tell a fish to stop swimming, the other shrugged. Do you want to go back to headquarters or go up and interview Black? Flip for it. Sure. The man pulled a coin out of his pocket. Call it in the air. Heads. The two men looked down at the coin. Have fun with Black. Have fun with your report, he replied as his partner disappeared. Why couldn't he have waited until next shift and saddled them with the paperwork? The man shook his head. Walking slowly towards the hotel, the man racked his brain trying to think of a way that all this could be reported in such a way that nobody would demand the arrest of Mr. Black. Did you see that? The shocked hotel clerk was staring out the window towards the pile of dead Death Eaters. They just fell from the sky. Yes, they did, the man agreed. I'm a cop, don't go outside, and don't leave. We'll have someone along to take your statement soon. Oh, okay, the clerk agreed. What room is Mr. Black in? One moment, the shaken hotel clerk checked his records. Room 1003. Thank you. The officer got in one of the elevators. 10th floor. The ride up to the 10th floor passed in silence, and after the doors opened, the Swiss cop walked to the door to Harry's room and knocked. I've been expecting you, Harry greeted the man as he opened the door. Would you like to come in, or would you like me to come with you? Hello, Mr. Black. My name is Wilhelmus Peterson. Why don't you tell me what happened on our way to the lobby? The Swiss cop suggested after taking a quick look around the room. One way or another. I'm sure that you're planning to switch hotels anyway. Okay, Harry agreed, shouldering his pack. It was the strangest thing. I was standing on my balcony eating a piece of chocolate, and out of nowhere a group of Death Eaters appeared, then mysteriously fell to their deaths. Peterson asked with a raised eyebrow. It was the strangest thing, Harry agreed. I don't even know how they were able to find me. Why would Death Eaters be looking for you, Mr. Black? They're always trying to kill me, Harry shrugged. I just assumed that I was the target. I see. Peterson nodded happily. That sounds like it should work. A car will arrive soon to give you a ride to a new hotel. We'll contact you again after we've had a chance to wipe this out of the hotel staff's memories. Okay. Harry shook his head. All I wanted to do in Switzerland was to eat some chocolate and get a new watch. Was that too much to ask for? I don't believe it was Mr. Black, but one can't tell the Death Eaters to stop attacking when one wants. I know. Harry clenched his hands in silent frustration. But I'm supposed to be on vacation, and so far I haven't had a moment's rest. Looks like your car's here, Mr. Black. Peterson pointed to a car parked in front of the hotel. Thanks. Harry shook the man's hand. And have a nice night. You as well, Mr. Black, Peterson replied, then watched Harry enter the car and drive off. Well, another man walked up. What was his story? He said that he had nothing to do with the pile of dead people. Peterson smirked. To hear him tell it, they just appeared and fell to their deaths without any assistance. Story check out? It did, Peterson chuckled. I looked around the room, and the only magical traces that I could detect was a homing spell on a pamphlet. Nothing else? Nope, Peterson grinned. When the French said that he could put up wards without being detected, I was a bit skeptical, but after tonight, explains why they hired him to take a look at the new wards down in Italy. Sure does, Peterson agreed. Why don't we see if we can trace the pamphlet and see if we can pick up whoever tried to plant it on Black before he finds them and arranges another accident. The two men went up to Harry's former hotel room and took a look around. I don't believe it. The second man called out in shock. The pamphlet has a little stamp on the back telling where it comes from. Let me have a look at that. Peterson squinted at the stamp on the back of the pamphlet. I know where he got this. We move in 3, 2, 1. The two men reappeared in front of a very familiar information counter. Can I help you, gentlemen? The attendant asked nervously. I'm only going to ask this once, Peterson growled. Did you give a pamphlet with a homing charm on it to a man today? I have no idea what you mean, the girl replied innocently. Why do you ask? Okay, if you don't know anything, then I guess the two of us will be going. Peterson shrugged. And I ask because a small pamphlet with a homing spell allowed a large group of Death Eaters to arrive from England to attack a man. How terrible, the girl shook her head. But I still don't understand why you suspected that I might have something to do with this. Well, after Mr. Black, that was their target's name, killed them, my partner, and I thought that his next target would be the person that gave him the pamphlet. Peterson shrugged, and the two of us wanted to get a good look at them so that when the time came we would be able to identify the body. Not that it would help to get a look, the other man added. I've heard that he likes to get messy sometimes, and after seeing what he did to those Death Eaters... You're bluffing, the girl began to sweat nervously. And even if you weren't, I haven't done anything illegal. Such a shame that is. Peterson shook his head in mock sympathy. I've heard that a nice safe prison cell is the best place to be if Black's after you, and even if he isn't, there's still the Death Eaters to consider. What do you think they will do when they find the person that led them into an ambush? But between the two of us, Black's the one I'd be worried about. The girl paused to think about things and shuddered at the images that her mind conjured up. I'll talk. I'll give you my list of contacts. I'll confess to everything I've ever done. Just keep them away from me. I thought you said you didn't know anything? Peterson asked innocently, and that you didn't do anything wrong. Don't play with me, the girl retorted angrily. This is my life we're talking about. I'd find it a lot easier to be sympathetic if you hadn't set a man up to be murdered. Peterson replied coldly, that sort of thing annoys me. I suggest that you accompany us down to the station, and I suggest that you don't even think about trying to lie to me. Okay, the girl deflated. I already said that I'd tell you everything. Just keep me safe. Touch this. Peterson pulled a button off of his shirt. It's a port key that will take us to HQ. The woman complied, and the three of them disappeared. Chief wants to speak with you, Peterson. One of the officers looked up from his desk to address the new arrivals. Who's your prisoner? She helped set up the hit on Black, Peterson replied. And she's still alive? The man looked at the prisoner with undisguised curiosity. I'll take charge of her. You go talk to the chief. Put her in one of the singles when you're done with her. Peterson nodded. And put up a suicide watch. I don't think Black will kill her after I said that we'd protect her, but I'd also think that it would be best to be careful. Got it? Peterson walked across the room to the office belonging to the head of magical law enforcement and chocolate inspection and gave a polite knock on the door. You wanted to see me? Come in and close the door behind you. The chief looked up from his desk. Looks like we might have to arrest Black over what happened with the Death Eaters. Why? Peterson stared at his boss in shock. They tried to kill him, and he defended himself. It's an open and shut case. I agree, the chief nodded. But the British minister has been complaining that we're letting the man who murdered several British citizens walk free, and he demands that we at least have a trial. We do that, and the judge would laugh us out of court. Peterson shook his head. There isn't a shred of evidence that we could use against Mr. Black. What do you mean? The chief leaned forward with growing interest. Black set everything up to look like an accident. Peterson smiled. All I can tell from the evidence is that a group of Death Eaters forgot to check the location before they ported in. Nothing directly points at Black doing anything. Then what makes you think that it wasn't an accident? Peterson glared at his boss. I've been investigating murder since before you started your first year of school, and I've never seen something like this. I'm not saying that you're wrong. The chief held up his hand. I've already decided to tell the Brits that it was all a big accident and that a large group of men, some of whom large contributors to the Re-elect Fudge campaign, had the bad taste to try pretending to be Death Eaters as some sort of prank because we know that me, as influential and rich as they were, would never support the dark thingy. All died in a tragic accident that Mr. Black had nothing to do with. I just want to know where Black slipped up. He didn't, Peterson replied with a laugh. Sorry about criticizing you, Hans, but I thought that all this time in the office might have turned you dumb. Black asked for a room on one of the top floors with a balcony and just happened to be standing on it when they ported in. We know from the French that he can put up undetectable wards, and I suspect that he warded his hotel room and then walked out onto the balcony to watch the fun. Anything else? The chief grinned. He was eating chocolates to pass the time waiting for them to appear, and he's thrown people off of buildings in the past. Peterson shrugged. There is no way that the sequence of events leading up to this could be random. Thanks, Willie, the chief chuckled. And thank Black for making things so easy if you get a chance. I've got to call the British and tell them about this tragic accident. Have fun with that, Hans, Peterson chuckled. And why don't you meet up with the rest of us for a few drinks if that idiot Fudge doesn't take too much of your time? I'll try, Willie, the chief nodded. And don't look so smug. It's your fault I have this damn job. Not my fault that I was smart enough to turn it down, and you weren't. Scene break. Harry awoke late the next morning and stretched. Walking to the balcony of his new room, he looked over the edge to ensure that a new group of Death Eaters hadn't ported in and fallen to their deaths. While he was sleeping, Harry smiled when he saw clean pavement without any blood stains. Dressing quickly and shouldering his pack, he left his room and went downstairs for breakfast. Good morning, Mr. Black. A man greeted him as he stepped off the elevator. Good morning, Mr. Peterson. Harry nodded to the Swiss law enforcement officer. Do you need me to answer any questions for your report? No. Peterson shook his head. All the evidence points to it simply being a tragic accident that you had no control over, and as such all we need is the quick statement you gave last night. Thank you. No thank you, Mr. Black, Peterson smiled. I came here to do a favor for some of my countrymen in Italy. They wanted me to take you to meet the gnomes so that they could brief you on your new account. That was nice of them. Harry smiled. Lead the way. Would you prefer a magical or non-magical form of transportation? Non. Harry smiled. After seeing that accident last night, I'd rather take it safe for a few days. I'll call a car. Peterson nodded, raised his hand to call the car. How are you enjoying your trip to Switzerland? From what I've seen, it's a nice country. Harry shrugged. After this, I guess I'll get a new watch and head to Germany. Leaving so soon? Peterson asked as they entered the car. No offense, but I'd rather not stay around after witnessing what happened last night. Harry resisted the urge to frown. After the appearance of the Death Eaters, the order was sure to follow. I just want a quiet vacation, and Switzerland is getting a bit too exciting. I understand. Peterson resisted the urge to laugh. Black had a great sense of humor. Where are you planning to go next? Germany. Harry smiled. After that, who knows? I hear that Berlin is nice this time of year, Peterson remarked. And Munich is also supposed to be a good place to see. Thanks, Harry nodded. I don't have any plans yet, but it's nice to get ideas. Glad I could be of help. Peterson looked around as the car stopped. It looks like we've arrived. The two of them exited the car, and Peterson led Harry through an impressive set of doors, past the main floor and to a door marked private. Just go in and tell them who you are. Peterson nodded towards the door. I've got to get back to work. Have a nice day, Mr. Black. You as well. Harry nodded back and knocked on the door. Yes. A short man with a large pair of glasses answered the door. My name is Mr. Black. Harry looked down at the man. And I was told that I was supposed to have a meeting with the gnomes. Right this way, the man replied briskly and opened the door wider to allow Harry to enter. I don't want to sound foolish, Harry began. But why is a bank being run by gnomes and not goblins? It's not being run by gnomes, Mr. Black, the man replied evenly. That's just a nickname used by some of the more ignorant members of society for the bankers here. As for why this bank is run by humans and not goblins, the man paused. We've never been forced to allow a monopoly to stop a war. Oh, Harry thought about things for a few minutes. Thank you for the information, and sorry about calling you a gnome. That's quite all right, Mr. Black, the small man replied with a bit of warmth. So long as it wasn't a deliberate insult, I see no reason to take offense. So, how does the bank here work? Harry asked curiously. The same as a non-magical bank would, the small man replied. We are currently in the magical section. You entered through the non-magical section. We see no reason to limit our customer base, and our accounts can be accessed by both magical and non-magical methods. That's useful. Harry nodded. What are we going to discuss in our meetings? It might be best to wait until we reach the privacy of my office before we talk about that, the small man replied. I do not mean to say that the bank is unsafe, but it's best not to take chances, Harry agreed. I understand. It's a sensible policy. I'm glad you think so. The small man nodded, opening a door. After you? Thank you. Harry nodded, walking into the room and taking a seat. First, let's get your account balance. The man pulled a small piece of paper out of his desk. It will display your current balance broken down into subsections of how much of what type of currency with a total in CHF at the end. CHF. Confederation Helvetica Franc. The banker smiled. After that, I have a small message that I'm to relay to you from several casinos in Monte Carlo. Thank you, Harry replied, taking the paper. Is this correct? Down to the last decimal point, the banker nodded. The casinos wish to thank you for your efforts on their behalf and the trust you showed by not immediately accepting your winning, and as a small gesture of appreciation, they have awarded you a small percentage of stock. How much? About 1/5 of 1% of all the casinos in Monte Carlo, the banker shrugged. It's not much, but it does provide a small income. The banker carefully avoided mentioning that the deal would benefit the casinos immensely. After all, who would try to cheat a place that they knew was partially owned by the infamous Mr. Black? Anything else? Harry asked quietly, still stunned by the amount of money in his new account. Not unless you have some questions for me, Mr. Black. The banker shook his head. Not right now. Harry blinked and looked at the figure written on the piece of paper again. I guess I'll be going then. I'll show you to the door. The banker smiled. It has been a pleasure doing business with you, Mr. Black. The pleasure was all mine. Harry smiled. Thank you for taking the time to see me. This way, Mr. Black. The banker led Harry through an array of hallways before reaching an exit. This is one of the more discreet exits into one of the magical sections of town. Thank you. Harry nodded, stepping onto the street. And have a nice day. You as well, Mr. Black. The banker closed the door. Walking down the street, Harry glanced at the window displays in front of the shops and stopped in front of one containing an array of timepieces. Entering the store, Harry looked around and found a man with a strange device on his head stooped over a small table. I'll be with you in a moment. The man didn't look up. I just want to get this last piece in before I stand up. Take your time. Harry nodded. I'm not in any hurry. The man spent several seconds tinkering with something on the table and then stood, removing the strange device on his head. Sorry about that. I was in the middle of something delicate, and I couldn't stop in the middle of it. No problem. Harry nodded. I've come here because I noticed your display, and I'd like to take a look at the most durable watch you have. Know what you want, huh? The man smiled and grabbed a solid gold jewel-encrusted watch out of the display cabinet. This one is as accurate as we can make it. The button on the side here will change it from local time to Greenwich Mean Time to any number of times that you select. It's also indestructible. Sounds like just what I had in mind. Only... Harry paused. Do you have something like it that isn't so gaudy? Of course. The man nodded, replacing the watch in its display and pulling out another watch. This watch has the same characteristics, but it is a bit less gaudy. I'll take it. Harry smiled, purchasing the watch and putting the plain silver object on his wrist. Do you know where I could arrange transportation to Berlin? Store up the street and to your right. The man nodded. Called Adventure Travel. You can't miss it. Thank you. Harry left the store and entered Adventure Travel. What can I do for you? The woman in the shop looked up from her desk. Port key to Berlin if you have one ready. Harry replied absently as he examined one of the pictures on the wall of the travel agency. One moment. The woman opened a cabinet and removed a small circular object. Anything else? No, that will be all. Then that will be 25 francs, the woman replied. The word to activate your port key is Berlin. Have a good day. You too. Harry nodded. Berlin. 12. The Wall. Good afternoon, sir. A smiling customs agent greeted Harry upon his appearance. How did you like the weather in Switzerland? It was okay. Harry shrugged, digging for his passport. How's the weather in Germany? It's good, sir. The customs agent nodded. Very nice at the moment. What is the purpose of your visits? I'm on vacation. Harry handed the man his passport. I want to get a look at some of the museums and monuments, and I want to sample some of your famous beers. Everything seems to be in order, Mr. Black. The customs agent stamped the passport and handed it back. I hope you have a nice, quiet time in Germany. So do I. Harry smiled. And thank you. Harry walked out and hailed a cab, unaware as always of the panicking law enforcement officers that he left in his wake. There was a sense of excitement in the air, and half the buildings of the city seemed to be under construction or renovation. Harry smiled as he wandered through the city, marveling at the surprisingly large number of buildings that still carried battle scars from the last war. Harry spent the entire day gazing at the wonders of Berlin until he finally wandered into a posh-looking hotel with a smile on his tired face. It had been a great day, and he was finally leaving all the strangeness behind. May I help you, sirs? A girl asked from behind the check-in counter. I'd like a room if you have one to spare. Harry nodded. The most comfortable one you have available. Yes, sir. The girl pulled a key off the rack. I'm putting you in room 406. Will you be requiring anything else? No, thank you. Harry took the key. Thank you. Thank you, sir. Harry went up to his room with a smile and tossed his pack on the bed. Walking over to the windows, he threw open the curtains and paused. Maybe it would be best to leave them closed. While it wouldn't stop people from appearing outside and then falling to their doom, closing the drapes would make it easier to pretend that he didn't notice anything. Harry woke up late the next day and, after checking his notes, realized that he was supposed to meet with a professor and henchgirl later in the day. Walking down to the hotel lobby, Harry stopped at a small information kiosk to get a bit of information on Berlin. May I help you, sirs? I've got a few hours to kill, Harry smiled, and I was wondering if you had any suggestions on places to visit? The Alliierten Museum is always popular. The girl behind the hotel's information counter smiled and began pulling out pamphlets. There are also a few other places that shouldn't be missed. Thank you. Harry nodded, taking the informative pieces of paper. And have a nice day. Harry's pulse quickened as he read the description of the Alliierten Museum. He had come to Berlin with the express purpose of looking into the history of the Soviet occupation, and now he had his chance. His interest in the wall was because it represented one of his very few happy childhood memories. Harry had been young when the wall collapsed, but he still remembered the look of elation worn by the reporter that broke the story. A look that told the world that evil had been forced back, if only for a while. A look that spoke of all being right in the world. His uncle had just stared at the television in shock, not believing what the reporter had just said. Unfortunately, Vernon had then noticed that the worthless boy was watching television, and then things had gotten a bit less pleasant. Despite that, watching as crowds of people tore down the scar running across Berlin was still one of the happiest moments of his life. Harry froze after taking his first step into the museum. The air around him was buzzing with magic, and his head whipped back and forth to find its source. May I? The greeter paused. You'll be wanting to go into the door to your front. Have a nice day. Oh, okay. Harry nodded, fingering his concealed wand. I'll just be going in then. You do that, the greeter agreed. Harry approached the door slowly, his instincts screaming at him to turn and run, and his curiosity urging him to go forward. Slowly, carefully, he reached towards the knob with his left hand and turned it. Easing the door back, Harry quickly stepped in and to the left. Hello. An older woman looked up from her magazine. Are you here for the tour? Yes. Harry shrugged. I guess so. One moment then, the woman stowed her magazine and pulled out a clipboard. Sorry about that. I get so few visitors that I wasn't expecting you. That's all right. Harry nodded and allowed his muscles to relax. What's the first thing on the tour? The first thing on the tour is, the woman glanced down at her clipboard, a section of the wall that still has the original wards intact. I wasn't aware that there were any wards. Harry blinked in surprise. Not many people know that some of the wards were preserved, sir. The woman nodded, misunderstanding Harry's statement. But we managed to stabilize the wards on our section before they unraveled. Oh, Harry shrugged. Do you have a diagram available? I'm afraid not, sir. The woman reddened. You see, we ran out of toilet paper last week, and, well, since nobody ever comes here... It's all right. Harry interrupted, not wanting to hear any more of the explanation. I don't need a diagram. I just wanted to look at the plans before I took a look at the wards. Oh, the woman nodded. Right this way. The two of them walked through a door and entered a room that had an entire wall filled by a large graffiti-covered chunk of cement. Were they effective? Harry asked, taking a doubtful glance at the section of wall that contained the last shred of the communist wards. Maybe I'm missing something, but this ward looks like it was put up by a first year. No, the woman shook her head. Most of Russia's magical talent fought with the whites. When the Bolsheviks took the country, most of the magical talent went elsewhere. What they did have was quantity, The Reds did have a small number of Muggle-borns, and over the years they were used to train any new Muggle-borns that didn't get rescued by one of the schools. Training wasn't too good, I take it? I'm told that they spent more time learning to be politically reliable than they did learning magic. The woman shrugged. But there was an old saying during the Cold War, it's quality versus quantity, but quantity has a quality all its own. Fascinating. I think so, the woman agreed. Now this next section. Harry spent almost 2 hours exploring the magical section of the museum, spending his time alternately shaking his head in disgust and rubbing his chin in interest. And here we are at the end of our tour. The woman smiled nervously. Would you care to get something in our gift shop? Do you have anything good? Harry asked with a raised eyebrow. Well, the woman managed a weak chuckle. You could get a piece of the wall and an old Soviet spellbook. Is the book any good? Harry asked quietly. Not really, the woman shrugged helplessly. Most of the defensive spells are next to useless, but the attack spells are fairly good so long as you don't need precision. If you don't need precision, then the attack spells are some of the most effective in the world. In what way? They were designed to be used by poorly educated conscripts, the woman smiled. It is very difficult to mess up their casting. And if you buy now, I'll even throw in a book of spells used by one of the more secretive organizations. Fine. Harry nodded, pulling out his wallet. I guess I can't pass up an offer like that. Here you are, sir. The woman passed over a bag containing Harry's purchases. Do you need anything else? One thing. Harry nodded. Could you direct me to the Welt restaurant Markthal's? No problem. The woman nodded, flipping through a book on her desk. The address is Pucklerstrasse 34, Kreuzberg, 10997. If you're taking a cab, just tell the driver to take you to Eisenbahn Markthal. It's connected to the restaurant. Thanks, Harry nodded. Have a good day. One more thing. The woman bit her lower lip. If you're going to eat there, try the Königsberger Klops. It's one of my favorites. I'll keep that in mind, Harry laughed. Have a good day. Harry exited the building and called a cab. Where to? The driver asked, not bothering to turn. Eisenbahn Markthal, Harry replied quickly. I've got a meeting with a friend of mine. You got it? The cab driver nodded. Mind if I ask what you're planning on doing in Berlin? Just meeting some friends and having a look around. Harry smiled, thinking about his moment of fleeting childhood happiness. Just wanted to take a look at where the wall used to be. Must be strange for you to see the city without the wall in it. It was there for so long. Harry gave a sad smile. Seeing it fall is one of the happiest memories of my life. I'll bet. The driver smirked. You gonna visit the Brandenburg Gate? I don't know. Harry shrugged his shoulders. Might go through it while I'm here, but I think that it might be strange to see it without the border guards. I'll bet. The driver muttered. What was that? Harry asked. We'll be there shortly. Oh, Harry nodded. Thank you. The cab stopped in front of the Eisenbahn Markthal, and Harry stepped out onto the curb. Mr. Black, it's so good to see you again. A short gnomish man and his henchgirl walked up. Hello, henchgirl waved. Hello, Professor, henchgirl. Harry smiled to his two friends. How are you doing? Very well. The short man beamed up at his dangerous friend. I trust that you've had nothing untoward happen to you since our last visit. It's been a series of unfortunate events, Harry sighed. For some reason, odd things keep happening to me. Well, the professor paused for a moment, unsure of how to reply. You can tell us about it later. Would you care to dine with us? Sure, Harry nodded. It's good to see the two of you again. You as well, the professor replied, and henchgirl nodded her agreement. We have the item that you requested, along with a few other things that may pique your interest. We can deal with that later. Harry put a hand on each of his friend's shoulders and with a sad smile said, For now, why don't we just have a nice meal together and talk about happy things? The two inventors agreed. each wondering what demons were haunting their friend and each silently vowing to do what they could to ease his torment. Well, Black was very cooperative. The cab driver smiled. He told me that he doesn't plan to kill anybody in Berlin, just visit with some friends and see the sights. Anything else? He talked about the Cold War, said it was strange seeing the city without the wall. The driver laughed, said that watching it fall was one of the happiest memories of his life. Probably because of all the time he spent in the Soviet sector trying to bring it down. I'm sure. The other officer nodded. Anything else? I talked to the woman in the museum. She said that Black mostly just came in and stared at the section of wards, then muttered something about how shoddy the Eastern Bloc's defensive magic was. Said that their offensive magic was fairly good if you weren't looking for subtly, but that their defensive magic sucked. The cab driver chuckled, said that any first-year student with a bit of magical instruction wouldn't have a problem making a hole in the first few layers of wards. I suppose that he'd know better than anybody. The older officer shook his head. The things he must have seen. That's not all. The cab driver smiled. When I was at the museum, I glanced at one of the photos showing the wall being torn down, and I noticed that one of the men tearing down the wall in the photo had a blurred face. The cab driver had an "I know something you don't know" smile. So the photographer wasn't very skilled, so what? The men around him had recognizable faces. Only his was blurred. The cab driver smirked. That's not all. I took a look at one of the other pictures showing life behind the wall, and I saw another picture with a blurred face. And this one was walking out of Stasi headquarters during the final days. The cab driver held up his hand. The same day that someone used a little magic to disable their paper shredders. That's very interesting, but it doesn't prove anything. I never said it did. The cab driver smiled. It's not the sort of thing for official reports, but I'm sure that if we can find a few more of these coincidences, then we won't have to buy our own beer for weeks. 13. The birth of Mr. Black. Just drop us off here, Harry told the driver as they neared his hotel. It's only about 100 meters from here, and we can walk the rest of the way. You got it, the driver nodded. Have a good day. You too, Harry replied as he and his companions got out of the car. Do either of you need any help with your bags? No, thank you. The professor shook his head. Both Henchgirl and I are stronger than we look. All right then. Harry shrugged his shoulders. Was there some reason you wanted to wait until we got to my room before we looked at the things you wanted to show me? I don't want the people watching us to know about what we've been able to develop with your assistance. The professor glanced around nervously, and several unseen watchers stepped back into deeper shadows. Besides, our hotel doesn't have room service. Okay, Harry nodded, holding the door open for his two friends. We can wait. They spent the trip to Harry's room in silence, and when they entered, the professor held up his hand. Would you mind putting up a privacy charm or two? I'd really rather not take the chance that anyone is listening in. One moment, Harry pulled out one of his new books and began flipping through it, then paused to study a page for a few moments. Absconditus Oratio. The professor looked around for a moment. What kind of spell was that? It was a spell that was used by one of the old Soviet organizations. Harry flicked his wand to put up a few more charms. I haven't used it before, and it doesn't hurt to be redundant. No, it doesn't, Mr. Black, the professor agreed, putting up a few spells of his own. I have your new wand here. The professor pulled out a small box. Take a look and tell me what you think. Harry removed the lid from the box and spent several moments gazing at the wand. It's so short. Yes, it is, the professor agreed. Gives a bit more control on the wand movements. It also makes concealment much easier. Harry pulled it out and gave it an experimental wave. The handle feels a bit strange, and I'm not feeling any sort of magical connection. The handle's been designed to make it easier to retain in a fight, and you're not feeling a connection because we haven't connected it to you yet, the professor smiled. The handle contains a small plug of a magically reactive metal that can be calibrated to react to specific magical signatures. When in the presence of the correct magical field, the plug slides out of the way and allows a connection to the user's magical core. Without the correct magical signature, it physically blocks any connection. What if I were to grip it in front of the handles? Harry asked with a raised eyebrow. And what's this thing made out of? If you gripped it in front of the handle, then you might be able to cast spells, but I don't believe it would be very effective. The professor smiled. I borrowed a bit of technology from the Muggles to make the body of the wand, and used a substance called carbon fiber. As you suggested, I also checked up on ministry regulations. Your wand is untraceable and nearly undetectable. I hope that it meets your expectations. It does. Harry nodded. You mentioned that you had a few other things you wanted to show me? Well, Hench Girl would be the one to ask about that. Hench Girl? We weren't trying to do anything that would annoy you, but since you left France, Hench Girl smiled nervously. Well, we've had a lot of requests from various law enforcement agencies on getting access to your floo tapping abilities. And we were wondering if we could get a look at it. I don't have the ability to tap floo. Harry looked at his companions with an odd expression. Why would they think I could? Of course you don't, Hench Girl nodded. But, we were doing some research, and I think we might have found a way to do it. Really? Harry raised his eyebrow. Tell me more. It's just a theory, really, the professor interrupted, and I'd rather wait until we have a chance to test it before we explain it in depth. If you like, Harry nodded. It's still just a theory, Hench Girl agreed. But while we were working on it, we came up with this. She pulled out another small box. We were able to miniaturize a connection to the floo network. But it's worthless. The professor re-entered the conversation. It's too small to put anything through it, and we can't get much of an image. Can you still use it to communicate? Harry asked. Because if you could, then you've invented something rather useful. But it doesn't do nearly the amount of things a floo should. The professor frowned. We were hoping you could tell us how to improve it so it would be useful. Make it portable, Harry shrugged. It will always be useful to have a portable way of communicating with people. I imagine that it could also be very profitable. We never thought about that, Hench Girl admitted sheepishly. We were just rather frustrated that we couldn't figure out how to engineer it so that it would do everything that a normal floo can do. Anything else? Harry resisted the urge to laugh. I don't suppose you'd be willing to help us create undetectable wards? The professor asked with a hopeful expression. I'd really like to know how to make undetectable wards. Sure, Harry nodded. I could help you figure out how to change the colors. After that, I don't think I can help you much. Colors? Yeah, Harry shrugged. Make them show the same colors as their background, or have them in one of the non-visible colors or something. Thank you, Mr. Black. We shall. The professor's hands were shaking in eagerness. Now, did you have any new ideas on items that would be useful? I did get stabbed in Marseilles. Harry rubbed his newest scar. I was wondering if you could develop some sort of armor that I could wear under my normal clothes. Well, the professor rubbed his chin. We've got just the thing. Steel silk. Steel silk. We developed it after hearing about a Muggle substance called steel wool, Hench Girl replied. We figured that if the Muggles could make something, then we could improve it. It's as soft and smooth as silk, but many times stronger, and it can't be cut like normal silk. Wearing it would provide protection from any sort of blade and quite a few spells. That could work. Thanks, Harry nodded enthusiastically. By the way, why did the two of you come to Germany? To build a Zeppelin, of course, the professor replied, and Hench Girl nodded in agreement. Why? Harry asked, and immediately regretted it. Where else would we build a Zeppelin but Germany? Hench Girl replied as if it were obvious. I suppose that we could have built one somewhere else, but it wouldn't have had the same Zeppelin building atmosphere that Germany does. I'll be damned, one of the watchers commented to his partner. I haven't seen that charm for a while. What charm? The other watcher asked with a raised eyebrow. Never did find out the name to it. The first watcher shrugged. It's a charm that was extensively used by Soviet state security to keep their meetings from being overheard. It is very effective and almost undetectable. Then how did you spot it so fast? I said almost. The first watcher chuckled. Once you know what to look for, it stands out like a miniature sun. Anyone that was working before the wall fell could spot it. Then why did Black put it up? Why wouldn't he? The first watcher shrugged. He's not trying to hide from us, and as I said before, it is a very effective spell. Oh, the younger watcher nodded. Where do you think I could learn it? You can't, the older man smiled. The Russians still consider it a secret despite its drawbacks and the fact that the Cold War ended. Then where did Black learn it? The younger man reddened when he noticed the expression on his partner's face. Right, he probably walked into Lubyanka and took it out from everybody's noses. Or he got it from a defector, or he learned it in an interrogation, or who knows? The older man shrugged his shoulders. But I think that your story is the better one to repeat after work. The fact that he used that spell really only tells us one useful thing. What's that? It confirms that he was one of the heavy hitters during the Cold War. The older man smirked. Nobody else would know one of their spells. Oh, the younger man nodded. Should we report this? Report the fact that he used the spell and answer any questions they have. The older man nodded. And then come right back. Yes, sir. The younger man disappeared with a pop and reappeared in a busy office. What do you need? One of the men looked up from behind his desk to regard the new arrival. I was told to report that Mr. Black used an old Soviet spell, the young man replied. My partner said that it was the one that was easy to spot when you knew what to look for, but that it was still effective. I see, the man nodded. Was Black alone? He was in the company of two other individuals, a male and a female. Were you able to identify them? No. The young man shook his head. Black used code names when he talked to them. I see, the man nodded. You had better get back to your post. Yes, sir. The young man disappeared with a pop. Harry awoke late the next morning and was surprised to find his two guests awake. Good morning. How was your night? Night? A confused professor lifted his head. Hench girl and I were unable to go to sleep without solving the problem you gave us on making a portable floo. Oh. Harry walked over to the room's phone and ordered breakfast. Did you do it? Well, it took us all night, but here it is. A bleary-eyed hench girl handed a small package to Mr. Black. We had to cut some corners to get it done so soon. What do you think? It looks okay so far. Harry turned the small object over in his hands. Why does it have Zippo written on it? Because those lighters already have everything we could want. They are lightweight. They have a built-in ignition system. They are small and portable. The professor was struggling to stay awake. And we were able to find it for sale in the hotel shop downstairs. I'm afraid we had to charge it to your room. No problem. Harry shrugged his shoulders. How does it work? For outgoing communications, open it up and spin the little wheel that will cause a small measure of floo powder to go into the flame. For incoming communications, it vibrates to indicate that someone is attempting to call you. The professor blinked his eyes. Henchgirl thought that it might be a bad thing if it were to suddenly make strange noises at odd times. She was right. Harry nodded. Does it use standard floo powder, or does it need some sort of special floo powder? Doesn't need floo powder. Henchgirl smiled proudly. We managed to enchant it to transfigure the flint into floo powder, and we also managed to enchant the flint and fuel supply to be never-ending. Very nice. Harry rubbed his new toy appreciatively. Could you change it to only use a special kind of floo powder? Child's play, the professor replied. But why would we want to do that? Well, Harry started slowly. It seems to me that this little device will become quite popular in the future, and if it needs a special floo powder, then I imagine that the potential profit would be enormous. The professor and hench girl shared a look. Profits? Yes, Harry nodded. You could make quite a bit of money with this little gadget. Money? Hench girl was astounded by the possibilities. Just think of all the inventions we could make if we had funding. Thank you, Mr. Black. The professor smiled. Now if you will excuse us, it's time for hench girl and I to go to bed. Use mine. Harry motioned towards the closed bedroom door. If you're willing to wait a few minutes, breakfast will arrive and I'll have them change the sheets while you eat. Thank you. Hench girl smiled. But won't we be disturbing you? No. Harry shook his head. I'm going to be out most of the day. Where are you planning to go? Hench girl asked with a smile. Harry's face lost all emotion. Dachau. Oh. Hench girl's smile disappeared. I'll see you two later. Harry stood up and walked toward the door. I'm sure that I'll have some more ideas for you later. Yes, the professor agreed sadly. Later. Harry walked out of his room and out of his hotel and soon found himself in the magical section of town. Excuse me, Harry asked a passerby. Could you direct me to a travel agency or some other place where I could get an internal port key? Right behind you, the man replied nervously. Thank you. Harry turned and walked into the shop. How may I? The shopkeep trailed off when he saw the expression on his customer's face. What can I do for you? I need a port key to Dachau and back. Harry's voice showed no emotion. How much? 50 marks. The man replied nervously. Will that be all? Yes, Harry agreed coldly. That will be all. Here you are then, sir. The man handed over a short length of chain. It will activate in a few seconds. To return just say Berlin. Thank you. Harry took the port key and disappeared. Harry spent an indefinite amount of time just wandering around the camp, staring with morbid horror at the crematoriums and gas chambers. Finally, he found himself standing in front of the doors to the furnace in the northwest corner of the camp, staring dully at the manufacturer's name. Toph and Sohn. One by one, the camp's ghosts, their eyes still showing the pain of their last moments, surrounded him. Harry looked into their eyes and fell to his knees. Taking several short breaths to keep his stomach under control, all around stood the victims of the camp watching him. I won't. Harry's lower lip quivered. I won't let this happen again. I swear to you that I won't fail again. Well, he spent the entire day at the camp, sir, the young officer nervously replied. Earlier today, he muttered something about not failing again and never allowing it to happen again. Other than that, he hasn't made a sound. Show him what we found, the chief of magical law enforcement ordered. And ask for his help. Sirs? He made a vow. The older man replied, rubbing a spot on his forearm. We can't do anything. Yes, sir. The young man agreed. Do you really think he can help us? No, I don't think he can help us solve this case. The old man shook his head. I think he'll fulfill his vow, and heaven help those poor bastards when he finds them. I understand, sir. The officer nodded. Do you want me to take anyone with me? I'll ask Grangers 9 if they can spare a few men. The old man sighed. Have them shadow you, to provide any assistance you might require. Yes, sir. The young man agreed, and turned towards the door. And Hans, the old man worked his jaw. Be careful. It would kill your mother if anything happened to you. Yes, Papa, I will be careful. The young man agreed without turning around. Goodbye, Papa. I promise that I will make you proud of me. You already have. Hans walked slowly towards the section of the building where the wards were thin enough to allow magical travel and then disappeared with a pop. Mr. Black. Hans approached slowly. My name is Hans Ritter. I'm with the Bundesamt für Magie. Harry turned to stare at the man who had interrupted his contemplation. What can I do for you? We were wondering if you would be willing to help us with a case. Hans held out a folder. We've hit a dead end, and we were hoping that you would be willing to use your unique insights to help us solve things. I am always willing to help competent law enforcement. Harry opened the folder. What's the case? A young Muggle-born girl was found murdered last week, Officer Ritter began. She was supposed to attend one of our magical schools later this year, and we believe that she was killed to prevent that. What about her family? Harry turned a page in the file and froze, unable to take his eyes off of the photo of the young victim. They were also killed, Hans replied nervously. We have a few ideas about which group might have done it, but we have no suspects at this time. Harry stared at the picture. He saw a small girl with a pretty smile. He saw a bushy-haired girl that would never help her friends with homework. He saw a girl with overly large front teeth whose parents wouldn't let her fix them with magic. He saw red. Where is the nearest bar that your suspect groups like to gather? Harry asked without emotion. There's a bar named Blot, Hans nervously replied. I want you to know that most Germans aren't like this. Most of us find this as disgusting as you do. I know. Harry's voice showed no emotion. Take me to Blot? Yes, sir, Hans agreed. If you'll just touch this bottle cap. The two men reappeared in front of a disreputable-looking building. Is this the place? It is Mr. Black, Ritter agreed. But I don't think that anybody will be in for a few hours. Wait here. Harry walked toward the door. Reducto. You have a warrant? A slimy-looking man sneered from behind the bar. If not, then I'm going to have to ask you to leave. Shut up. Harry drew his new wand and hit the wall behind the man with a blasting curse. There were some murders committed. A little girl and her family were killed because she was magical. So? The man replied nervously. One less mudblood. Harry walked towards the man and placed the tip of his wand on the man's kneecap. I suggest you tell me who did it and where I can find them. You can't do this. The man was shaking. There are laws that say you can't do this. There are also laws that say you can't go around killing little girls and their families, Harry retorted. And it offends me when people break them. Now answer the questions. I don't know anything, the bartender protested. Nobody's said anything. The kind of people that I'm looking for wouldn't be smart enough to keep their mouths shut. Harry's face looked as if it could have been carved from stone. Reduc. Wait, the man screamed. Wait, I'll tell you everything? Yes, Harry agreed. You will. Hans was pacing nervously when Harry stepped out of the ruined bar. Well, do you know where Tierparkstrasse is? Harry asked, ignoring the man's questioning look. Yes, I do, Hans nodded. Why? Take me there. All right, Ritter nodded, pulling out another portkey. The two men felt a pull from behind their navels and appeared in front of a large house. Do you have any information about one of your suspected groups being in this area? Yes, we do, Ritter nodded. Are they who you're looking for? Ignoring the man, Harry walked towards another house down the street. Knocking on the house's door, Harry waited calmly for one of the house's inhabitants to answer the door. What do you want? A dirty man answered the door. Are you a member of a group that believes in pure blood nonsense? Harry asked with a raised eyebrow. Yes, I am, the man sneered. Did you kill a young girl and her family to prevent her from getting a magical education? You a cop? The man grinned. You trying to get me to confess? No, Harry shook his head. I just wanted to make sure I got the right people. Reducto. Harry stepped over the body and into house. Is there anybody here who doesn't believe in a racist ideology? A dozen shocked men reached for their wands. I thought not. Reducto, Aduro or Palm. Nobody move. Several men in black ran into the room. Mr. Black, would you please lower your wand? The men watched nervously as Harry considered the question. Of course I will. Do you need anything else, or can I go? You can go, the man nodded. Thank you for the help. Harry took out the length of chain that he had been given earlier that day. Berlin. What a mess. The man shook his head looking around. He really doesn't believe in subtlety, does he? He normally does. Ritter shook his head at the mess. Most of his kills look like accidents or coincidences. I guess he didn't feel like making the effort today. What do you think set him off? Ritter paused, remembering his conversation with the enigmatic Mr. Black. The child. Black was angry about what they did to the child, and his control slipped. Makes sense. The other man nodded. Better call the coroner and tell him to bring a mop. I'm going back to the office. Ritter held a hand in front of his nose to block out some of the smell. Can your men keep watch here? Sure. The other man nodded. Take your time. I'll be back as soon as I can. Ritter took one last look at the horrifying scene and disappeared. You know, the man addressed his team in a low voice. I think it's a shame that there weren't more of them here when Black arrived. The men looked at him with expressionless faces. On the other hand, he doesn't seem like the sort to stop here. He gestured towards the scene of carnage. I'm willing to bet that we're going to find quite a few more of these in the future. I'm also willing to bet that if something like this happened again in the near future, that it would be blamed on Mr. Black. Harry returned to his hotel room and immediately started packing. Is there something wrong? The professor asked nervously. What happened? I'm going to leave here. Harry's eyes were blank. Then I don't know what I'm going to do. What happened? The professor repeated. Group of Death Eater wannabes killed a little girl. Harry paused. I killed them. I see, the professor nodded. Why don't you come stay with us for a little while? Stay with you? Yes, the professor nodded. You could see the Zeppelin, and we could all talk about new inventions and forget that today ever happened. Harry nodded. All right. I'll create a port key. The professor grabbed one of the free hotel pens. You get hench girl. Mr. Black is in Germany, sir. A large, dirty man addressed a shadowed figure. What do you want us to do? See about contacting him, the shadowed figure replied. See if he's willing to give us the same deal he gave to the Italians. That might not be a good idea, sir. The man licked his lips nervously. Black's not in a very good mood right now. What happened? A group of blood purists killed a child, the large man replied. Black killed several, but not all of them, and I don't think he would be very happy to see anybody right now. I see. Tell the men. The shadowed figure paused. Tell them that it's open season on blood purists. The sooner they're gone, the sooner Black will leave the country. Do you still want to obey Black's rules? What did he do to the purists? The shadowed figure asked with a raised eyebrow. I'm told that the coroner is going to have to spend most of the next week trying to figure out what parts belong to who, the large man replied. And several of the cops are saying that we're in the calm before the storm. They say that Black's about to go on a rampage. Follow Black's rules, the shadowed figure nodded. And start dealing with the purists. The sooner they're gone, the sooner Black will leave. Yes, sir. 14. The Black Massacre. Luna. Laodice Lovegood called his only daughter. I have another assignment for you. What is it, fathers? The spacey young girl walked in. Do you want me to go to Germany? No, I'll cover that. There was no way in hell that he was going to send his daughter to Germany with what had been happening there for the last few days. I have something more important for you to report on. What? Luna blinked curiously. Did we finally get proof that the Malfoy family was descended from house elves? Not yet, Laodice frowned. The ministry still won't let me have one of them for testing. Oh, Luna's shoulders dropped in disappointment. That's too bad. What do you have for me then? I want you to go to Holland and get some more information on the Snorlax. Okay, father, Luna nodded. I hope you don't get too bored writing a story about all those murders in Germany. I hope so too, dear. Laodice nodded. But someone has to do it, and since you have the good article, I'm stuck with the boring one. Luna walked over to the fire, tossed in a handful of floo, and shouted out her destination. Then she squealed in happiness as she felt herself get thrown around on her way to her destination. Welcome to Holland. A bored-looking man greeted her upon her arrival. How may I help you? I'm supposed to meet with someone from the Department of Magical Creatures to get information on an article for the Quibbler. Luna smiled brightly. Oh yes, the man nodded, checking his list. We've been expecting you. Really? Luna asked delightedly, have I been declared an enemy of the state? Are you going to put me in your secret prison on the moon? Hun. The customs agent shot her an odd look. Hey Doc, your reporter is here. Good afternoon, Ms. Lovegood. The man identified as Doc walked up. I'm Dr. Vim Cornelison. I understand that you have some questions to ask me? Yes, I do, Luna nodded. Why hasn't anyone been able to get information on the existence of Snorlax before? We've discovered that the males put out a natural wizard-repelling charm which has until now kept them from being noticed. What about the females? Snorlax like to den in large hills, and the females rarely leave the nesting sites. The doctor smiled, and they also emit a natural muggle-repelling charm. We believe that this is why muggles think that Holland is a flat country, because there are Snorlax living in all the hills. Luna asked with a raised eyebrow. Yes, the doctor replied with a laugh. Fascinating, isn't it? Come in, Hans. The chief pulled a bottle out of his desk. And have a seat. The rather pale-faced office sat down. What do you want to know? I have the reports. The chief made a motion towards a stack of paper on his desk. But I'd like to hear what you experienced. I took Mr. Black to the blood hex. Mr. Black broke down the door and walked in. One quick question, Hans, the chief interrupted. Did he have his wand out when he broke down the doors? No. Hans looked at his father in shock. I remember him drawing his wand as he walked into the bar. I see, the chief nodded. He's been known to use wandless magic before, and I was wondering if he used it this time. Continue. Yes, Papa, he came out a few minutes later and told me to take him to Tierparkstrasse. He ordered me to wait at our point of arrival and walked up the street. Hans took a deep breath. I called the men, and we arrived at the house about 2 minutes later and found Black standing over a dead man and staring at a room full of corpses. I see, the chief nodded. Thank you, Hans. I understand now. Understand what, Papa's? Hans's eyes were filled with confusion. Why he was so overt. The chief poured himself a drink and motioned for his son to do the same. When I decided to ask for his help, I did it on the assumption that he would solve our problem the same way he's done such things in the past. You expected them to die in an accident. Hans took a sip, or for it to be a clear-cut case of self-defense? Yes, I did, the chief nodded. And I was more than a bit surprised when I found out what he did. Now I want you to think, did you see him do anything illegal? No. Hans shook his head. The worst thing I saw him do was break down a door, which is punishable by a fine at most. The chief smiled. Forensics spent quite a bit of time in that house. Do you know what they found? I'm not sure. Hans shrugged his shoulders. What did they find? Nothing. The old man smiled. They couldn't even prove that any spells had been used, let alone that Black cast any. So what we have is no physical proof and a room full of dead witnesses. But I saw Black go to the house. Hans took another sip. Doesn't that mean anything? You saw him walk towards a house. The old man nodded. But you didn't see him commit any crime. He would say that he found the house like it is. How long was he out of your sight? No more than 5 minutes. So you expect me to believe that a man was able to kill several blood purists without leaving any evidence? The chief smiled, and was able to do it in less than 5 minutes. I see, Hans nodded. But why didn't he do things the way he normally does? Some things, the old man rubbed a spot on his arm. Some things leave a mark on you. I think that your file brought up too many old memories. What do you... Hans stopped as he realized why his father was rubbing his arm. I understand, Papa. Thank you for explaining things. I'm always glad to explain things to you, Hans, the chief nodded. It looks like Black is calming down. Why do you say that, Papa? In the past few days, there have been several murders. The old man gestured towards a stack of files on his desk. Some of them were messy, and some of them were clean and professional. And the last two looked like accidents. The old man smiled. And another looks like suicide. One man got so drunk that he passed out and drowned in 2 inches of water. Another walked into traffic and was hit by a large truck. What about the suicide? Found with a rope around his neck in a locked room, though there are some people that think Black didn't kill that one. The old man laughed. They say that he killed himself because that was the only way he could think of to escape. I do have one more thing I'd like to ask if it's not too much troubles. What is it, Hans? Were they able to identify any of the spells he used to eliminate the men in the house? There were no signatures, but one of the forensic technicians said that the damage was similar to several of the old Russian battle spells. I see, Hans nodded. That does fit some of the things that people have been saying about him. What are you planning to do now? The chief finished his drink and poured another, now that your case has been closed. I still have one loose end to take care of before I finish my case, Hans smirked. And I plan on having a bit of fun with it. Then you best get to it, Hans. The chief waved his hand in dismissal. It's always best to get things done early. Goodbye, sir. Hans stood up and opened the door. Goodbye, son. The chief replied to his son's retreating back. Hans walked down the corridors until he found himself in front of the door to one of the interrogation rooms. Well, he's ready for you, sir, another officer replied. Are you sure you want us recording this? I'm sure, Hans nodded. Don't miss a second. Okay, the other officer shrugged. If that's what you want. Hans walked into the bare room and took a seat across from the suspect. Good afternoon, sir. How are you doing today? You've got nothing on me, the ugly man sneered. My arrest wasn't legal, and you have to let me go. Arrest? Hans asked with a shocked expression. You weren't arrested. You were brought down here to swear out a complaint against the man who broke the door to your business. Unless, of course, you'd rather let things go. No, the ugly man replied smugly. He broke the law, and I want him to go to jail for it. Well, Hans shook his head. I don't think that he'll go to jail, but he will have to pay a rather large fine, and for the repair of your property. Good, the ugly man nodded. What do I have to do now? Just sign these papers. Hans slid a stack of papers across the table, and we can start things. You trying to trick me? The ugly man carefully checked the papers. I mean, this all seems to be in order. Good, Hans nodded. I wouldn't want you to be displeased by the service that you've experienced during your stay as our guest. Can I go now? One moment, Hans stood and walked towards the door. You still have to identify the man who damaged your property. Oh, the ugly man grinned. Be nice to be on the other side of the mirror for once, I guess. I'm sure. Hans nodded and knocked on the door. What do you need? The officer from before stuck his head in. I've got a complaint for you to process. Hans handed over the stack of papers. And I need you to pick up Mr. Black for me. I need him to stand in a line-up. No problem. The officer fought hard to keep his amusement hidden. I'll try to get him here as soon as possible. What did you just say? The ugly man had a look of terror on his face. Did you just tell him to get Mr. Black? Why, yes, Hans nodded. Or, didn't you know that he was the man that broke the door to your bars? You didn't say anything about Mr. Black. The bartender shook his head. I don't want to complain. I want to leave things alone. I'm afraid we can't do that, sir. Hans shrugged. The papers have already been filed, and there is nothing I can do to stop the process now. I don't want to go to court against Mr. Black. The ugly man's eyes darted around the room. I don't want to swear out a complaint. The only way I could stop things is if you told me that you had sworn out a false complaint. Hans kept a helpful expression on his face. And I would advise you not to do that, because the penalty for swearing out a false complaint is rather severe. I admit it, I lied. The ugly man screamed, and I'd done a lot of other things too. Just stop that complaint. Really? Hans had a predatory look on his face. What other things? Welcome back, everyone. Dumbledore gave the room a grandfatherly smile. I call this meeting of the Order of the Phoenix to order. My first order is that those members of the Order who have been searching for Mr. Potter on my order stand up and address the Order and tell us what you have learned. Really, Albus? Minerva frowned. Couldn't you have found a way to phrase that without saying the word order so many times? No, I couldn't. The headmaster ate a lemon drop. If nobody has anything to report, then Alastair has something he'd like to share with us. Black's back, the scarred man leered. And he's been busy. What did he do? A random order member asked to get the plot moving. In Italy, he managed to convince the mafia that backing the Dark Lord would, Moody paused, not be to their benefit. How did he manage to do that? Dumbledore asked with a raised eyebrow. He told them that if they didn't comply, then he'd kill them all. The old Orr gave a wheezing laugh. Few of them didn't think he could do it and broke into his hotel room. Well, he tossed one of them out a window, another down a staircase, and the last he gutted like a fish. Moody's eyes spun around. After that he went to Switzerland. The Dark Tosser must have found out because he sent a group of men to make an example. Was anybody injured in the attack? Dumbledore's eyes turned serious. Do the Swiss authorities need any help to contain this outbreak? No one was hurt. Moody shook his head. Least no one important was hurt. Death Eaters all died in an accident before they could do anything. Off the record, Black messed with their portkey, but nobody can prove anything. Were any of the Death Eaters identified as being members of the inner circles? Dumbledore asked cautiously. The Swiss believe that one of the bodies might belong to Lucius Malfoy. Moody's voice held a trace of satisfaction. And if it does, the eyes say it couldn't have happened to a better target. That might be why the minister ordered a team of Aurors to go on 24-hour alert. Shacklebolt entered the conversation. He also mentioned that there may be some international travel involved in our secret mission. I see, Dumbledore nodded. Where's Mr. Black now? Germany. Moody dropped a handful of newspaper clippings on the table. And in the time he's been there, he's virtually wiped out any base of support that Voldemort might have been able to draw on. The Order spent several minutes reading the articles and passing them around. Die Untold We the editors are sorry to say that this is the last issue of Die Untold, the newspaper for people who hate Muggles. Unfortunately, things like rising cost of production, the fact that due to Mr. Black the obituary page is larger than the size of the last 3 issues combined, and the fact that we are in fear of our lives, have caused us to reach the decision that it's time to end before we suffer an accident or are killed in a bizarre and painful way. We would like to note that Die Tolerance, the newspaper for people who love Muggles and fear Mr. Black, will be coming out next week to fill the gap created by the loss of Die Untold Bloodbath in Germany. See page A14. By Laetus Lovegood. Death is in Germany, and his name is Black. Over the past week, Germany's morgues have been filled with blood purists and other Death Eater sympathizers. They've been stabbed, beaten, hexed, poisoned. Their deaths have been quick and clean, slow and painful, and everything in between. After learning of this situation, we at the Quibbler found ourselves possessed by the need to know what started this chain of events. What we found may shock you. The trigger that caused what many are calling the Black Massacre was the death of a young Muggle-born girl that was scheduled to begin school at the start of the next term. Sources close to the investigation have revealed that Mr. Black is not being sought for questioning due to the lack of evidence connecting him to any of the crimes. Speaking on the condition of anonymity, one law enforcement official gave the following statement. The death of the little girl angered Mr. Black, and I only have one thing to say about that. Don't make him angry. You wouldn't like him when he's angry. 15. Led Zeppelin. Well, Henchgirl asked with a worried look on her face. How is he? He fell asleep right after he finished the second bottle. The professor sat down next to his assistant. I'm worried about him. I am too, Henchgirl nodded. What caused all this? He saw some terrible things today. The professor shook his head. Very terrible things. What? I can't tell you, Henchgirl. The professor had a sad look on his face. I can't bring myself to say it. I understand, Henchgirl nodded. He started talking after he finished the first bottle. The professor paused. He told me some rather shocking things. What kind of things? Some rather shocking things. The professor held up his hand. Before I tell you, I want you to remember that he's our friend and we agreed to stand by him." "I know, Professor." Hench Girl was starting to get worried. "What could he have told you that would cause you to worry that I would forget?" "Well," the professor began, "he told me—" Harry awoke late the next morning with a pounding headache. "Oh, God. Where am I?" "You're in our hangar," the professor replied loudly. "Would you like a tour?" "I'd like something to kill this hangover," Harry hissed out. "Or something to kill myself. At the moment, I don't care which one I get." "I'll have Hench Girl whip something up," the professor nodded. "I'll be right back." Harry spent several more minutes wallowing in agony before the professor returned. "Did you get it?" "Yup," the professor nodded proudly. "One sip of this would kill a herd of elephants." "You do know I was being sarcastic about the whole killing myself thing, right?" Harry asked without opening his eyes. "Yes," the professor nodded nervously. "Of course I did. I'll be right back with the potion. I just need to take it out of the room for a few minutes before I give it to you." "Fine," Harry sighed. "Why am I cursed with such a life?" "Here you are," the professor returned with another strange-looking potion. "One sip of this will kill your headache." "Thank you." Harry downed the potion. "Why doesn't it taste like the bottom of a men's room floor?" "I asked Hench Girl about that once." The professor smiled. "She said that she could make them taste terrible if I wanted, but that it would add several steps and have no purpose other than to make my life more miserable." "Oh." Harry's eyes narrowed as he contemplated all the vile concoctions that Madame Pomfrey had given him over the years. "Shall we take a look at this Zeppelin of yours?" "Let's," the professor agreed eagerly. "Walk this way." "Sure." Harry shrugged and began following the professor. "There she is," the professor nodded proudly. 200 meters long and 42 meters in diameter. It is capable of speeds of up to 200 kiloliters per hour, and we believe that the charms will remain stable for up to 92 years without maintenance. "And I still say that a blimp would have been a better choice." Hench Girl entered the conversation. "There are several advantages of a non- or semi-rigid frame over a rigid frame." Silence. The professor glared up at his assistant. "A non-rigid frame would not have provided the proper platform for our research." "Admit it." Hench Girl glared down at the professor. "You just wanted to show off your great engineering skills by building the large framework. No thoughts about the fact that one of the other designs would have been better." "How dare you question—" "Wow," Harry interrupted. "Whatever it is, it's great. What did you fill it with?" "Nothing." The professor turned away from the glaring Hench Girl. "It's more efficient that way." "What do you mean, nothing?" Harry gave his two friends a strange look. "How can you fill it with nothing?" "It's all about volume," the professor began to lecture. "If it weighs less than the material it displaces, then it floats. If it weighs more, it sinks. And if it weighs the same amount, then it has neutral buoyancy." "But how can you—" Harry stopped for a moment to think. "Never mind, I don't want to know how you do it." "How do you go up and down?" "To go down, we pump air from the surrounding atmosphere into our tanks. To go up, we pump the air out. And to get neutral buoyancy, we either pump air in or out depending on if we are descending or ascending." "Like a submarine?" Harry asked cautiously. "A what?" the professor asked. "It's a boat that goes underwater," Harry answered. "I think it works the same way that your airship does." "Hench Girl, make a note of it. How do you prevent collisions with other aircraft?" "Collisions? Other aircraft?" The professor looked nervous. "You do know that the skies are filled with aircraft, don't you?" "But my research indicated that the Muggles have mostly given up using airships." The professor looked confused. "If that's so, then what are they using?" "Planes, helicopters, all kinds of things." Harry shrugged. "Are they really so widespread?" The professor was intrigued. "My sources indicated that they were only used by military and by some of the more wealthy families." "Things have changed," Harry sighed. "Any other questions?" "No." The professor shook his head. "Thank you again, Mr. Black. You've prevented what could have been a terrible accident by informing us of these other aircraft. Happy to help, Harry smiled. What are you using to power the propellers? Henchgirl and I constructed several Tesla disk turbines to provide the necessary power. The professor smiled. We were going to use Stirling engines, but the Tesla design looked more interesting. That's good, I guess, Harry replied, making a mental note to find out more about engineering. What are you going to do about a crew? So long as we don't try anything too ambitious. Henchgirl and I are all the crew that this craft needs, the professor smiled. Did you have any more ideas for items that we could build you? I don't know, Harry shrugged. Might be a good idea to have a backup one of some sort, one that could be easily concealed as something else or something. I'd also like to get some sort of invisibility or concealment device that can't be seen through, like an invisibility cloak. Can invisibility cloaks can be seen through? The professor's eyebrows shot up. I didn't know that. Who can do it? I know for a fact that Alistair Moody and Albus Dumbledore can. Harry scratched his chin. Not sure how Dumbledore does it, but Moody has a magical spinning eye. Fascinating. The professor was lost in thought. It may take some time before I am able to come up with something like that. No problem, Harry shrugged. If you can build something like that, great. If not, then oh well. Thank you for your faith in us, the professor smiled. We'll get on it as soon as we figure out how to solve the mid-air collision problem you mentioned earlier. Why not try something like what's used on the night bus? Harry asked with an interested expression on his face. It has to drive through busy streets, and it doesn't crash into anything. That wouldn't work. The professor waved his hand. Excuse me for 1 minute? Sure. Harry shrugged his shoulders. Henchgirl, henchgirl. The professor ran off in search of his assistant. Harry's smile dropped as soon as his friend was out of sight. He was still having problems trying to figure out how he was supposed to feel after what he had seen and done. This vacation was supposed to be a few months of relaxation. It was supposed to be a lifetime of living condensed into a summer holiday. Instead, it seemed as if the universe was refusing to let him alone. It seemed as if he was destined to be attacked and dragged into other people's fights. Yes. Good afternoon, Mrs. Granger, the headmaster smiled. I was wondering if I could talk to your daughter for a few minutes. Of course, Mrs. Granger smiled. Come right in and have a seat while I get Hermione. Thank you. The headmaster gave his best grandfatherly grin. You wanted to see me, Professor? Hermione asked, entering the room. Yes, the headmaster nodded. I'm trying to get into touch with Harry, and I was hoping that you would be willing to help me. Why do you need to talk to him? Hermione asked with a neutral expression. There are a few things that I need to tell him, things that I should have told him a long time ago. The headmaster exhaled. I would also like to make sure that he has a way to contact the order if he needs help or is in trouble. Oh, Hermione frowned. So, you're not going to make him go back to his relative's house? No, Dumbledore shook his head. I came to a realization after hearing your theory about why he left. There is an old saying, those who are willing to sacrifice freedom for security deserve neither freedom nor security. I wondered what that had made me. The man who was willing to take another's freedom to keep them safe. I'm sure you were doing what you thought was best. Hermione tried to cheer the old man. There is a saying about good intentions. The headmaster forced a smile. But that isn't what I came here to talk to you about. Do you have any idea where we might find Harry? Mr. Weasley seemed to think that he would be living or working in or around a Quidditch stadium. Ron sometimes has a hard time telling the difference between his wants and dreams and other people's. Hermione frowned. Continuing that thought, I don't think you would find Harry in any of the world's great libraries or bookstores. Maybe in a circus or around an amusement park, maybe a zoo. What makes you think that? Dumbledore's eyes were filled with interest. I think that he wants to fill an entire summer with things that he's never been able to experience before. Hermione paused. Harry didn't have much of a childhood, so I think that he might be trying to give himself one. Thank you. Albus silently cursed himself for being such a fool. You've been most helpful. If you find Harry, Hermione bit her lip. Tell him to write me Ron too. I will. And if you find Harry, Dumbledore pulled two small objects out of his sleeve. Give him one of these. What are they, Professor? Hermione took the two objects. Have you been following the Quibbler's coverage of Mr. Black? I haven't been reading the Quibbler. Hermione shook her head. And I don't know who Mr. Black is. Mr. Black is a wizard that has been traveling through Europe making life difficult for the dark side. Dumbledore smiled. These two devices are portable floo connections that were developed by some of Mr. Black's people. I was able to use a bit of influence to acquire these two before they became available to the general public. There is a small instruction manual engraved on the side of the device, and I've been told that their appearance will go unnoticed in the Muggle world. Thank you, Professor. Hermione smiled. Thank you, Hermione. The headmaster returned her smile. If you see Harry, tell him that I am very sorry. I will. We're losing too many of our readers to that damned rag Lovegoodowns. A large fat man waved his arms in a comic fashion. Does anybody have any idea of how we can regain our shrinking market share and bring our profits back up? We could shift our focus away from gossip and barely substantiated rumor, one or the other. Men suggested. Maybe the public's appetite for news is changed since the reappearance of He Who Must Not Be Named. I like it. The fat man nodded. The public wants fantasy to get away from the reality of the Dark Lord. It will also cut costs when we fire most of our reporters. Who needs reporters when you're just making things up? Fudge a monkey? Our sources reveal that since Fudge's swearing in as Minister of Magic, Ministry Potions Masters have been receiving regular orders for Polyjuice Potion. This may not seem odd until one points out that Slappy the magical chimp disappeared from his cage the same year that our minister started Hogwarts. For those that don't remember, Slappy was the chimp that was known to use accidental magic to change the color of his droppings. 16. Train. Goodbye, Professor, henchgirl. Harry smiled. Thanks for cheering me up. I really needed your support. Think nothing of it, my friend. The professor smiled. Just keep giving us ideas to work on. I will. Harry nodded as he turned to walk away. Harry walked several blocks before stopping and hailing a cab. Sometimes he forgot that he didn't have to worry about money like normal people did. It wasn't like he was going to need it in a year or two. Where to? The cab driver didn't even bother to look at his customer. Center of town. Harry closed his eyes. Wake me when we arrive, and take your time, I'm in no hurry. You got it, the driver nodded. Anything else? No. The ride passed in silence, and the driver took several nervous glances at the apparently sleeping man in the back seat of his cab. We've stopped, Harry commented, not bothering to open his eyes. Have we arrived? Yes, sir. The driver stared straight ahead. Do you need anything else? No. Harry handed the man several bills. Have a good day. I will, sir. The driver nodded, taking the bills. You as well. Thank you. Harry walked out of the cab and began muttering to himself. Austria. I think the best place to go now would be Austria. The cab driver's hands shook as he watched the man leave. He hadn't understood the order from above when they told him to keep an eye out for the frightening man with the unrecognizable face, and if he had been in any other line of work then, he would have laughed it off and forgotten about it. The driver calmed his hands and carefully pulled into traffic. The strange man had given him a message to pass, and he didn't think that it would be healthy to delay its delivery. It did not take long for Harry to find the town's sole magical shop. Taking a nervous breath, he walked in. One moment, an old man that Harry presumed to be the shopkeeper spoke from the back of the shop. What can I do for you? I need to find a way to arrange transportation to Austria. Harry managed a weak smile. I can arrange something for you. The old man smiled. But I'm afraid that it might take a bit of time. How long? Harry asked with a sigh. Depends. The old man smiled. Might be best to spend a bit of time looking around my shop. I'm sure that I'll have something ready by the time you want to make your purchases. All right, Harry nodded. The best things will be through that doorway, the old man commented. You might want to start there. The things on display out here are just cheap trinkets for the tourists. If you say so, Harry agreed with a shrug. He was beginning to suspect that there wasn't a sane shopkeep in the world. Walking through the indicated doorway, Harry spent several minutes browsing and finally returned to the counter with a small selection of the odd items that he had seen. I see that you were able to find some things. The shopkeeper looked over the items that Harry had placed on the table. Interesting selection. I mostly chose the things that I didn't recognize, Harry admitted with a grin. The man held up an odd-looking blue flag with a golden disc surrounded by a green wreath with red flower, small Union Jack in the top corner. I believe that this is the regimental colors for a unit of British infantry. I'm not sure where it came from, and I'm afraid that I can't tell you much about it. That's fine, Harry shrugged. I have a friend that would love to figure out where it came from. I'm glad. The second item, the shop owner held up a large iron ball, is a portable dungeon made for some marquis in France as a recreational item. It comes with a full assortment of devices and a full reference library. Recreational item? Moving right along, the man picked up a length of chain. This is a steel whip made of several thousand interlocking rings. It has a large assortment of enchantments that allow a skilled user to do a number of astounding stunts. Thanks, Harry smiled. Is my port key ready yet? Before I answer that, I think that you'll be wanting to buy one of these too. The shopkeeper placed a large stein alongside Harry's other purchases. What is it? Harry eyed the strange cup with a large measure of suspicion. It's just something to drink beer out of. The old man smiled. Why? This is a magical shop. Harry took a step back. And I'm waiting for you to tell me why you're selling something so normal-looking in this shop. Oh, is that all? The old man smiled. Now that you mention it, I may have accidentally put a few charms on it so it automatically fills itself from the taps at a few of the local breweries. Oh. Harry began to relax. For how long? I'm not exactly sure how long the enchantments will hold up. The old man shrugged. After all the things that his cousins were inflicting on the boy, he deserved some sort of compensation. Few years at least. I'll take it. Harry couldn't wait to show it to the twins. Thank you. And since you're getting that, the shopkeeper grinned. You'll have to have one of these. One of what's? Harry closed his eyes and began rubbing his temples. An ever-full flask. The store owner dropped a large silver flask on the pile. Fills with your choice of several dozen non-magical liquids. Just the thing to complement an ever-full stein. Okay, Harry nodded. Is the port. And a perfect complement to the stein and G mug is this book. The shopkeep put out a rather large book. The Single Wizard's Guide to Keeping His Witch or Witches or Pack of Vila happy. Fine. Harry forced a smile. Can I have that port key now? No problem. The shopkeep held out his hand. The port key is ready, and all that you need to do is pay to on your way. One moment. Harry dug out a hand full of coins. Here you are. Thank you. The old man handed back a cloth bag containing Harry's purchases and a small glass bead. It will activate in 3, 2, 1. Harry felt the world spin, and the portkey dragged him to his next destination. Good afternoon. A man in a strange uniform greeted Harry upon his arrival. How are you today? I'm fine. Harry began to relax. How are things in Austria? No attacks or odd occurrences? No, sir, replied the now curious customs agent. Why do you ask? I've been under a lot of stress the last few days, and I was hoping to get a chance to relax without being blindsided by all the weirdness that usually inflicts itself on my life. I see, the customs agent frowned. What's in the bag? This. Harry glanced down at the bag containing the items he collected in the odd shop. Just a few things I picked up in Germany. May I have a look? Sure. Harry placed the bag on a convenient table. The customs agent's eyes widened in astonishment as he took his first look. You say that you picked these items up in Germany? Yes. Harry nodded. Is something wrong? No. The man shook his head. Nothing is wrong. It's just history is a hobby of mine, and when I saw the flag, could I ask your name? Black. Harry held up his passport. That won't be necessary. The agent returned the shopping bag. And let me be the first to welcome you to Austria, and to wish you good luck and good hunting. Thanks. Harry gave slow nod of acknowledgement. Was there something else you needed? No, sir. The agent smiled. I'm sure that you must be tired from your travels, so why don't you head into town and find a hotel while I go report to my superiors? Okay? Harry walked away from the customs desk and into the rest of the building. The customs agent smiled as he watched the smooth departure of the mysterious Mr. Black. He pitied the fool that Mr. Black had come to eliminate. Stepping out of the customs room, Harry was almost overwhelmed by the amount of people rushing back and forth. Excuse me, a young woman spoke up, distracting Harry from the number of people rushing around. Would you like me to help you arrange transportation? What? Harry turned to look at the woman. I'm sorry. I just didn't expect to see that. Harry waved his hands to indicate the scene. I understand, the woman nodded. Vienna is unique in that it is one of the few cities to use a large Muggle airport to house its magical processing center. And they don't notice anything odd. For the most part, they're tired, frustrated, and in an unfamiliar place. The girl shrugged. When I consider all that, I sometimes think that we don't even need to keep up the charms. I see, Harry nodded. Makes sense, I suppose. Now what was that question you asked me before? Oh, the girl blushed. I was just asking if you needed me to help you arrange transportation? I might, Harry nodded. What are my options? Well, the girl smiled. The first thing you need to do is decide if you want to use magic or Muggle methods of transportation. Muggle, I suppose. Harry smiled. Okay, the girl nodded. Do you need any help arranging things in the Muggle world? No. Harry shook his head. I don't believe I'll have any trouble arranging things. Then have a nice day, sir. The girl smiled cheerfully. You as well. Harry smiled, then turned to walk into the airport. Harry spent a bit of time exploring the airport, marveling at its sights, sounds, and smells. Never before had he experienced something so seemingly chaotic. It was all so new, all so fascinating, and before he knew it, several hours had passed, most of which spent watching the planes take off and land. Until, finally noticing the time, and a bit embarrassed at the fact that he had spent the entire day staring at something so common as take-offs and landings, Harry began to make his way to the rail station. Something to read on the train? An older gentleman asked, holding up a newspaper. Only a shilling, and well worth it. All right. Harry took a moment to pull out a handful of the appropriate currency. Thank you. Always happy to help a traveler. The old man smiled. Despite the fact that he had been born without a significant amount of magic, he still suffered from the family curse, and he was still loyal to the cause. It didn't hurt that it allowed him a chance to make a bit of money of a group of rather dull-blood purists. After all, who else would be dim enough to go hunting for the infamous Mr. Black? Here's your change, sir. Have a good day. Thank you, Harry smiled. I will. The old man smiled as he thought of the chaos that he saw coming thanks to his actions. The damage to the Dark Lord's forces would be immense. Not bad for a squib that wasn't normally good enough to merit the notice of the more uptight members of Wizarding Society. Harry had only a short wait before his train arrived, and he quickly found a seat in the last car. Opening his newspaper to pass the time, he soon lost all interest in the world around. Well? The rat-like man asked nervously. After hearing your problem, I think I've found a solution, replied a young man with a smile, though I still think it would be best if I were allowed to examine the site of the accident to make sure that my calculations are correct. And it's still impossible to allow that, Wormtail hissed. The Dark Lord hadn't been pleased by the portkey accident that had destroyed the team in Switzerland and had taken his displeasure out on his one minion capable of making international portkeys. How does it work? It casts a small charm to check the elevation of the target area a few seconds before rematerialization and automatically aborts if the projected landing site is more than 10 feet above the ground level. The young man resisted the urge to laugh, though I must admit that I'm still a bit mystified as to how something like this became necessary. I'm not supposed to reveal trade secrets, and you know it. Wormtail frowned. At present the portkey maker was too important to alienate, but as soon as he began to suspect something, or 3 seconds after they acquired another wizard capable of making international portkeys. Well, the portkey maker spoke, interrupting Wormtail's train of thought. Don't hesitate to come back if you have any more problems or questions, though for the life of me I still can't understand why a pet shop would need such highly specialized portkeys. That's not for you to know. Wormtail tried and failed to look menacing before disappearing with a pop, reappearing before a throne in a darkened manor house.
Well,
the dark figure on the throne hissed. I have it, master. Wormtail fell to his knees and began kissing the hem of his master's robe. Then take it to the strike team, the dark voice replied. Yes, master. Wormtail stood and slowly began backing out of the room. One more thing, Wormtail. Yes, master? The rat-like man cowered. I want you to accompany the team, the dark voice hissed. I want a personal report on the mission after your return. Yes, master, the rat-like man whimpered as he fled the room. Wormtail's look of fear transformed into a superior sneer as he entered the room that had been assigned to the group of Death Eaters that had been chosen for the task of eliminating Mr. Black. Stand up, Wormtail's sneer deepened. And touch the portkey. You don't want to have to explain to the Dark Lord why you weren't on the mission he assigned to you, and I'm not going to wait for you to ready yourselves. The assorted Death Eaters all touched the portkey and readied their wands. Just before the portkey activated, Wormtail smiled. Mr. Black will die tonight. The group of Death Munchers appeared in mid-air, and for one frightening second, Wormtail knew what that last team felt before they met their end. Several Death Eaters cried out in surprise as gravity exerted its control and dragged them to their fate, which happened to be about 1 meter below their arrival point. Who streaked? Who's the coward in the Dark Lord's army? Wormtail shouted, trying to cover up his own nervousness. Most of the assorted Death Eaters ignored the rat, though 1 or 2 of the newer recruits looked down at their feet in shame. Where are we and where's Black? The senior Death Eater hissed. You had better not have made a mistake, rat. I made no mistakes. Wormtail cowered, forgetting his earlier show of command. It looks like we're on the tracks for the Hogwarts Express. It does, doesn't it? The senior grudgingly admitted. Black must be in the castle. The muggle-loving old fool must have put up new wards. That's right, Wormtail admitted nervously. It's not my fault. The remainder of Wormtail's words were drowned out by the bellow of a train's horn and the shriek of its brakes. Most of the assorted Death Eaters didn't even have time to scream before they were ground into paste under the lead car's wheels. Ahead, Harry looked up from his newspaper as he heard the terrible shriek of a train's brakes off in the distance. Shaking his head, Harry wondered for a second what had happened on the track behind to cause such a sound, then shrugged his shoulders and went back to his newspaper. He'd hear about it if it was anything important. 17. IT sleeps. The return of the survivors of the attack on Mr. Black was met by a hall of shocked silence as their assembled brethren. As the assorted Death Munchers closed in on the 2 surviving strike team members, one of the survivors let out a long shuddering gasp and expired. The other wheezed loudly. Ambush. Everyone is dead. After that, the man's body gave one long shudder before he too joined his team, mates in death. The assorted Death Eaters looked at each other in shock. What are we going to do? One of the newer members asked. You go inform the Dark Lord of what has happened. One of the more experienced munchers replied. We'll clean this up. Right. The new Death Eater agreed, wanting to get as far away from the bloodied mess on the ground as he could. The more experienced Death Eaters watched the man go with barely concealed smirks and grins of anticipation. What? The Dark Lord bellowed. Crucio. Let's get to work. The experienced Death Eater motioned towards the mess. Our master won't be happy, and seeing this might give him an excuse to show us how unhappy he is about the situation. The Death Eaters moved forward and began lifting up the shattered remains. What do we have here? One of them smirked, holding up a concussed rat with a bloody stub where his tail had been. Looks like the master won't be showing us his displeasure after all. Heh, another Death Eater sneered. Take him in to see the master. Wouldn't want to keep the Dark Lord waiting after all. Peter awoke to the frowning face of his master and nearly wet himself when he realized that his years of running from death may be coming to an end. Tell me, the Dark Lord's voice was oddly calm. Tell me what happened to the men that I sent to kill Black. I heard a terrible shriek and saw a bright light. Peter shivered. I turned into a rat and I felt a pain in my tail. There was a strange sound, and I couldn't see anything after the sound went away. I saw two of the newer recruits trying to activate the port key, so I crawled over to them. I see, the Dark Lord nodded. Much as it pains me to say it, death will not be your punishment since I still have some use for you. Crucio. I'm sorry, master. The rat sobbed. I'm sorry I failed you. The Dark Lord turned away from the rat and towards his last victim. Have another team readied. Tell them to come back successful. Yes, master. The young Death Eater sobbed. I shall do it immediately. Thank you all for coming. The grizzled-looking older man looked around the room. Many of you have heard rumors about a wizard named Black wandering around Europe, making life difficult for blood purists and other assorted bad types. Yes, sir. One of the men in the crowd nodded. But what's that have to do with us? Black arrived last night. The older man looked around the room. And destroyed a Death Eater hunter-killer team before we even had a chance to set up surveillance. How did he do it? We're not sure, the older man admitted with a frown. The deaths looked like an accident, and the bodies were too damaged to make any conclusions. So, he's still angry about what happened in Germany then? Looks like he's calmed down a bit. The old man held up some pictures that looked like the floor of a slaughterhouse. As you can see, whatever he did was messy. But unlike most of the deaths in Germany, this one looked like an accident, and my counterparts tell me that he likes to make things look like accidents and coincidences. Based on his past behavior, what happened in Germany was not normal. Do we have any idea what set him off? I asked. The old man frowned. And all I was told is that Mr. Black is very old, and that something terrible happened that brought up memories of a terrible time. What terrible time? One of the younger officers asked. The Germans suspect that Mr. Black may have had a hand in liberating the camps, the old man sighed. And they think that may have been one of the things that set him off. Several of the younger law enforcement officers shifted uncomfortably in the silence that followed the commander's last statement. How do you want us to act towards Mr. Black? One of the officers asked, breaking the silence. Keep an eye on him and listen to what he says. I'm told that he likes to give advice to the people following him. Do not enter his hotel room uninvited and be polite. The old man smiled. I'd like to get him in here for a tour of the place, and I don't think he'd agree if we weren't polite. Harry spent most of the morning laying in bed and lazing about. After years of waking with the dawn to make breakfast for his family, it felt strange to sleep in and spend the day doing nothing. until finally hunger drove him from his bed and towards his sweets telephone to order room service. After his desire for food had been appeased, Harry's eyes darted around the room in search of entertainment. They lingered for a time on the large television in the center of the room before reluctantly moving to his pack and the books within. Hermione would kill him if he spent his entire vacation without doing anything productive. Besides, it was possible that there could be something within one of the books that would help him live to see his 18th birthday. Snorting at the thought and smiling cynically, Harry pulled out one of the books and began to read. Room service. Harry's reading was interrupted by a knock on the door. One moment, Harry put his book face down on the table beside his chair and walked towards the door. "Come in." "Thank you, sir." The hotel's employee looked around the room. "Doing a bit of readings? It's always a good idea to take the time to improve your mind." Harry grinned. "Do you have what I ordered?" "Right here, sir." The man nodded, holding up a tray. "Where do you want me to put it, sirs?" "On the table is fine." Harry motioned. "Is there anything else?" "No, sir." The hotel employee shook his head. "Only that the meal and any future meals you chose to have here are compliments of the management." "Thank you." Harry nodded. "You are very welcome, sir." The man nodded. "So, unless you need me for something else?" "No." Harry shook his head. "I have everything I need." "Then good day, sir." Harry watched as the man carefully closed the door. The strangeness of the man's actions caused Harry's paranoia to go into overdrive. Eyeing the food with hunger and suspicion, Harry picked up one of the books that he had been reading and began to flip through it until he found the section on poisons. A wave of his wand and a muttered incantation left Harry feeling a mixture of embarrassment and relief. If he didn't learn to relax, then he'd end up like Moody before the summer was up. On the other hand, Moody had lived through several attempts on his life. "Professor," Harry called into his lighter. "Professor, are you there?" "No," a female voice answered. "But I am. What do you need, Mr. Black?" "Hench girl?" "Yup," the voice giggled. "Can I help you with something?" "I was wondering if you could develop some sort of item that detects poisons and things," Harry asked quietly. "Might be nice if it did other things too, but something to detect poisons was my first thought." "Okay," Hench Girl's voice replied. "We'll add something to detect things onto the list. Do you need anything else?" "No," Harry smiled. "Do you?" "Not at the moment," Hench Girl replied quickly. "But if I think of something, I'll let you know." "Thank you, goodbye." "Bye." That taken care of, Harry sat down and began to eat. At the same time, the man who had delivered Mr. Black's food was preparing to make a report of his own. "This is Blackwatch calling HQ," the man whispered into his own Zippo. "I have a report on my first meeting with Mr. Black." "Report?" The voice that replied was devoid of emotion. "I delivered his food, and we talked for a few minutes. He was reading when I arrived, and he advised me that research was essential to our line of work." "Did you see what he was reading?" "No," the agent replied with regret. "Most of the titles were in languages that I couldn't understand." "I see," the voice replied. "Continue." "After that I left," the man finished. "I think that he may have performed some sort of detection spell while I was in the hall, but I didn't recognize the magical signature." "That's also understandable. Mr. Black has a habit of using odd, obscure, and unknown spells." The voice paused. "It's also understandable that Mr. Black recognized you as something other than a hotel employee when you entered his room. To the best of my knowledge, no one has ever been able to fool him, and he keeps his tales until he grows tired of them." "Got it," the man nodded. "Blackwatch signing out." HQ signing out. Harry spent the remainder of the day reading books and ordering room service. At the end of the day, Harry finally put up his books and went to sleep with plans for the next day dancing in his head. Harry awoke late the next morning and sprung out of bed. Today was the day that he was going to set his plans into motion. Today was the day that he was going to do something so strange and humiliating that none of his friends at Hogwarts could ever know about it. Marching down to the front desk, Harry handed over his key. "Checking out, sirs?" "No." Harry shook his head. "I'm going out for the day, and I suspect that I might end up doing a bit of drinking, and I don't want to lose it." "I understand, sir." The clerk nodded. "We'll have it waiting for you when you return." "Thank you." Harry nodded. "I'll be back later today. Tomorrow at the latest." "Have a good time, sir." The hotel desk clerk waited until his guest was out of sight before calling his superiors. It didn't matter that Black knew he was being watched. It would have been impolite to be blatant about it. "Good afternoon, sir." A pair of men approached Mr. Black. "How are you today?" "I'm fine," Harry answered politely. "How are you?" "Fine." The men nodded. "The two of us work for magical law enforcement, and we were wondering if we could ask you a few questions." "Sure." Harry shrugged. "Ask away." "For starters, do you mind if we ask where you're going today?" "Salzburg." Harry smiled. "I hear that it's a beautiful city, and I'd like to go look at a few things." "It is," one of the men agreed. "Have you arranged transportation yet?" "Not yet." Harry smiled. "Is there anything you recommend?" "Well," one of them smiled. "Would you mind accompanying us? We have to go anyway." "Sure." Harry smiled. "And thank you." "No problem." The man nodded to his partner, who disappeared with a pop. "My partner will be back with a port key in just a few minutes." "Thank you." Harry nodded. "It sure was lucky that you happened to be going to Salzburg, too." "Yeah, lucky." The man grinned, resisting the urge to laugh. "So, did you hear about the group of Death Eaters that they found on the tracks the other day?" "No." Harry's eyes widened in concern. "What happened? Was anybody hurt?" "Only the Death Eaters." The man marveled at Black's performance, if he didn't know any. Better he would swear that Black had nothing to do with the incident. "Looks like they poured it in and were killed by the train. A rather fortunate accident." "Yeah." Harry nodded in agreement. "It's a good thing they were taken care of before anybody was hurt. Lucky thing they were so careless with their arrival point." "Yeah," the man agreed. "Lucky." Any further conversation was cut short by the reappearance of the man's partner. "I've got the port key." The man smiled, waving an old shoe. "Grab hold so we can be on our way." "Where to now, Mr. Black?" one of the Austrian law enforcement agents asked with a smile. "Well," Harry paused. "First, there's something I'd like to do in the hills. After that, I'm planning to have a bit of fun." "All right." The man nodded. "Let's go." The three men spent most of the trip out of time in deep conversation about a wide array of topics, from the insurrection in England to the odd way Death Eaters kept dying in accidents. "Here we are," one of the officers smiled. "About the most isolated place you can get to this close to town. The wards keep folks from noticing this place and spoiling the natural beauty." "Thanks," Harry smiled. "I really appreciate the fact that you two took the time to take me here." "Not a problem, Mr. Black," the second officer replied. "We're happy to provide the company." "I've got to go do something," Harry smiled. "I'll be right back." "Have fun," the officer smirked. "I will," Harry replied innocently as he began to walk away. Harry walked around the nearest hill and found himself in a small draw, and after taking a moment to look around to ensure that he wasn't being followed, he cleared his voice and began to sing. "The hills are alive, and they're eating people." He choked off a laugh. He had wanted to do that since his primary school class had watched The Sound of Music. "I just hope they never find out about this," Harry mumbled. His dorm mates would never let him forget it if they learned about it, and who knew what sort of twisted thing Snape would do. No, it was better that this all remained his little secret. "Did you hear that?" one of the hidden officers whispered to the other. "IT might be breaking loose." "I heard." The other man's voice was grim. "I'd love to know how he knew that IT even exists, though." "Let's get back to the trail," the other whispered back in reply. I've been told that Mr. Black likes to maintain the illusion that he doesn't notice the way people follow him. The two men stood and reached the trail only moments before Harry's return. Thanks for waiting, Harry smiled. I just had to get something out of my system. No problem, one of the officers smiled, though I'm afraid that we'll have to leave your company after we get to town. Oh, Harry asked with a raised eyebrow. Did something come up? Yes, the officer agreed. Something came up that we need to deal with right away. Good luck with that then, Harry smiled. Thanks, the officers nodded. Let's get back to town. The three men returned to Salzburg, and the two law enforcement officers bid Harry a fond farewell, leaving Harry to plan the remainder of the day's activities alone. Excuse me. Harry turned to look at the two buxom blonde backpackers that had just addressed him. Yes? You wouldn't happen to know where the Sound of Music tour is, would you? I'm afraid not. Harry shook his head. But it sounds interesting. Would you mind if I join you? Not at all. The two Swedish backpackers grinned. Let's go. It did not take long for Harry and his two companions to find and join the tour, and the three of them spent the next several hours visiting the places that the film was filmed in the company of a drunken, singing group of fellow backpackers. They ended the night in a hostel called the Yoho, drinking pints of beer and listening to the Sound of Music play on the television. Harry's last memory before everything went black was of doing a layback under the tap while watching a large and rather fat German dance on one of the tables while wearing a pink latex bodysuit and matching tutu. Sir, one of the law enforcement officers that had been escorting Mr. Black burst into their superior's office. The wards holding IT are starting to unravel. What? The old man's eyebrows shot up. Explain? We were talking to Mr. Black, and he indicated that he wanted to take a stroll in the hills to take care of something, the officer began. When we got there, he went off on his own, and we observed him check the wards. Then he called out that IT was going to start eating people. The officer frowned. We met up with Mr. Black, and he claimed that he had gone off to answer the call of nature. He likes to play innocent. The old man waved his hand in dismissal. What happened next? We accompanied Mr. Black back to Salzburg and watched him leave with a pair of attractive young Swedish backpackers. The officer grinned. Then we alerted everyone we could in Salzburg and went back to the prison. Go on. The old man struggled to remain calm. It took the specialists 3 hours to find the weak point in the wards. The officer shook his head in wonder. It took a team of 12 experts 3 hours to find something that Mr. Black discovered in 30 seconds. Turns out that someone has been weakening the portions that control the alarms. Once those were gone, they would have been able to release IT at their leisure. I trust everything's been taken care of. Yes, sir, everything been taken care of, and there's an investigation to find out how the wards could have been breached. Good, the old man nodded. Though I do wonder how Black knew about IT. I did too, sir, so I looked at the records. The officer licked his lips nervously. As you know, there were 13 survivors from the group that battled and defeated IT. And 12 of them were recorded by name. The officer paused. And the 13th was recorded as the unknown wizard in black. I see. The old man exhaled. The Germans said he was old, and the Italians said he was even older. Sirs? The Italians think that he's been around for at least 2,000 years. The old man chuckled. Would explain how he does what he can do? I guess it would, sir. 18. Happy early birthday, Neville. Harry's mouth tasted like a men's room floor, and his head felt like it had been used as an anvil by a town full of blacksmiths. Groaning in pain, he forced himself to stand up and immediately regretted it. Taking a few stumbling steps towards the door, Harry managed to find his way out of the building where he had awoken. Harry spent several minutes stumbling through the streets before a cab driver took pity on him and pulled over. You look like you need a ride somewhere, the driver smirked. Yeah, Harry agreed. Just take me anywhere that I can catch a ride to Vienna. Hey, you got it. The cabbie watched his customer through his rear view mirror. Rough night? You could say that, Harry agreed. I just wish I remembered what happened after my 10th drink. We've all had nights like that, the cab driver sympathized. Just close your eyes, and I'll wake you when we get where we're going. Thank you. Harry nodded, taking the cab driver's advice. Took Harry several agonizing hours to get back to his hotel, and when he arrived, he found one of 2 magical law enforcement agents that had escorted him to Salzburg waiting for him. Good day, Mr. Black, the agent smiled. How are you today? Bit tired, Harry gave a tight-lipped grin. I had a rather eventful night. I'm sure, the agent smiled. I came by to give you an invitation to tour the national headquarters for magical law enforcement. Can I tell my superiors that you accept? 1 second. Harry glanced down at his watch. Can you come back in a few hours? I really need a chance to get some rest first. Of course, the agent nodded. I'll be waiting in the lobby in 3 hours. Harry glanced down at his watch. 4 would be better. Yes, sir, the man agreed. I'll be back in 4 hours to get you. Fine, Harry nodded. Goodbye. Goodbye, Mr. Black, the agent replied before disappearing with a pop. Harry groaned as he shambled his way towards the elevator. Sleep and a handful of painkillers awaited. Is everything ready? The Dark Lord asked in a dangerously calm tone. We're just waiting for the port keys to be finished, my lord. The Death Eater simpered. As soon as it's ready, then we'll be able to strike. Excellent, the Dark Lord purred. Black will soon draw his last breath. Yes, master, the flunky agreed. Crucio. Bwahahaha. The Dark Lord grinned. He loved his life. Harry awoke and spent several minutes staring at the ceiling before he managed to gather up the motivation required to get out of bed. Stumbling around his room, he managed to dress himself and was soon on his way to his meeting in the lobby. Are you ready to go, Mr. Black? The agent asked as Harry stepped off the elevator. Yeah, Harry nodded. You got a port key? Right here, sir. The agent nodded, holding out a piece of paper. And it should go off in 3, 2, 1. Is this the place? Harry asked, mentally noting that hangovers made travel by port key a lot more exciting than was normally the case. Yes, sir, the agent nodded. We're currently in the lobby of the main headquarters building. Nice, Harry nodded as he examined the wards. They look fairly comprehensive. I wouldn't want to try to get through those after they've been completed. After they've been completed, sirs? The agent asked with a look of confusion. Harry didn't bother to halt his examination. Oh, the wards. The completed sections look like they would provide a lot of protection. The incomplete sections look like they wouldn't stop a group of determined first years. I must admit that the quick patches that you've thrown over them look fairly impressive. Doubt most people would notice that they weren't more than cosmetic. I see, sir. The agent laughed nervously. How did you notice that the patches were ineffective? Wrong color. Harry shook his head. They stood out like a sore thumb. But it's difficult to spot them in black and white, though. Yes, sir. The agent agreed. Almost impossible. Thanks for allowing me the time to look at this. Harry motioned towards the building. What's next on the agenda? The agent took a moment to reboot his thought processes. A tour of the holding area, sir. Could we hold that off until I get a bit of food? Harry glanced down at his watch. Or some coffee? Of course, sir. The agent nodded. Would you be willing to eat at the on-site cantina? Sure. Harry nodded. Sorry to put you through so much trouble, but I haven't eaten anything today, and I just realized how hungry I am. As I said before, it is not a problem, sir. The agent smiled reassuringly. Right this way, sir. Harry followed the other man through a dizzying array of passages until finally they reached their destination. I'm afraid that we don't have much available right now, the agent frowned. But I'm sure that we can find something. Anything is fine, Harry nodded. I just gotta get something in my stomach. Then wait here, the agent motioned towards a table. And I'll go talk to the cooks? Thank you. Harry sat down. It's not a problem, sir. The agent nodded, before rushing off, returning a few minutes later with a sandwich and a couple cups of coffee. Thanks, Harry nodded, reaching for a sandwich. As I was saying before, the agent began. Our holding areas are state-of-the-art. Each one comes equipped with magic dampening fields, high gravity, and one-way wards. How do they work? Harry asked, making polite conversation. The magic dampening fields are self-explanatory, but we've managed to include some improvements that you might not be aware of, the agent said enthusiastically. We've constructed them so that their drain will render all forms of magical transportation ineffective. The high gravity, or HG, will make it difficult for them to move, and we hope that it will also have a negative effect on magic. Finally, the one-way wards will allow people to enter, but will prevent them from leaving. We included that so that we can lose the dampening fields and still not have to worry about a mass escape. Fascinating. Harry tried and failed to pretend interest. When would you like to see the holding areas, Mr. Black? The agent asked, taking a sip of coffee. Harry looked down at his half-eaten sandwich. Talk about the prison had killed his appetite. Now is fine. Then let's go, sir. The agent jumped up and took Harry through another maze of passages. Is there some reason that you chose to use traditional bars? Harry asked with a bored expression as he stared into the cell. Is there another way to do things, sir? The agent asked eagerly. I don't know. Harry shrugged. I suppose you could use some sort of unbreakable glass or... Harry blinked in shock at the dozen Death Eaters that had just ported into one of the empty cells. Die black. A dull orange light shot out of one of the Death Eaters' wands and dissipated only centimeters in front of Harry's nose. Wow, you guys are good. Harry smirked at the trapped Death Eaters, though you might want to tell your men to take their wands before you put them into their cell next time. Yes, sir. The agent nodded weakly. Don't think I don't appreciate the demonstration you decided to hold for me. Harry laughed. Now I know why you wanted me to inspect the holding cells so badly. I love the way you had these Death Eaters poured in at just the right moment and cast a spell at me that just happened to dissipate, effectively showing how effective your new wards are. Yes, sir. The agent nodded dumbly. Do you do this for all the tours? Harry smiled. If not, then thanks for going all out and doing it for me. Gosh, this is great. If you say so, sir. The agent nodded. Could you wait outside for a moment? Of course, Harry nodded. Again, great show. Pass my compliments to your boss. I will, sir. The agent nodded. I will. Harry smiled as he left the room. Getting a few Orcs to dress up like Death Eaters and poured in at just the right moment was sheer genius. It really showed the effectiveness of the wards, and it really made one feel special to think that they had gone to all that trouble just to make their tour feel special. The Austrian law enforcement agent stared dumbly for several more seconds before he pulled out his new lighter and called his boss. What is it? The grumpy voice of the head of magical law enforcement asked. I was up all night dealing with investigation of the wards around IT, so it had better be important. Several Death Eaters just ported into the new holding cell, sir. The agent resisted the urge to giggle nervously. Mr. Black wanted me to send along his thanks for such a memorable demonstration of the new ward's effectiveness. What? The chief's voice asked, no longer showing any fatigue. If this is a joke. I think it might be, sir. The agent giggled nervously. But not the part about having a group of Death Eaters poured in, that's real. I see. The chief took a deep breath. They said that Black had an odd sense of humor. I have a team on the way. Take Black on the rest of the tour, and don't let him have the satisfaction of showing any more surprise. Reacting to his little pranks will only encourage him to do more of them, and I'm not sure if we could survive more of Black's little jokes. Yes, sir. The agent nodded dumbly. I'll go show Black the firing range next. You do that, the chief agreed. I'm out. The agent carefully replaced his lighter in its hidden pocket and walked out the room to meet the still grinning Mr. Black. Would you like to see the firing range now, sir? The agent asked, managing to regain his professionalism. Sure, Harry nodded. Let's go. Right this way, sir. The agent started walking. The firing range allows us to practice the more destructive spells in our inventory without causing any accidental damage. The back wall is composed of several iron sheets and nearly 3 feet of stone. As an added precaution, it has also been charmed for toughness and to self-repair. Sounds interesting, Harry nodded. How often do you practice? Department policy states that field personnel must practice weekly, and in the case of our more elite sections daily, while deck workers must practice monthly or bi-monthly. In practice, most people head in for an hour of practice before or after work every day. You'd be surprised at how relaxing it is to blow large things into small chunks. Sounds great. Harry nodded in agreement. It is, the agent nodded. And here we are. Would you care to test it out? I'd love to, Harry nodded. What do I do? Stand on the yellow line. The man indicated a line that bisected the large room. And call target. A large chunk of stone will come out of the floor. If you prefer wood, then call wood target. And if you want to test your accuracy, then call out bullseye. That's all. Harry asked, walking towards the line. That's all, the agent confirmed. Have fun? What spell should I use? Harry smiled, pulling out his snub-nosed wand. How about something powerful? The agent suggested, wanting to see just what kind of spells Mr. Black could use. Interesting wand. A friend of mine made it for me, Harry commented as he searched his mind for the right spell to start out with. It measures 0.38 inches in diameter, and it's very special. I imagine bit smaller than normal, though. The agent nodded. Does its size affect its pow? The agent trailed off as a massive black sphere shot out of the tip of the wand and obliterated the target and a good section of the wall behind it. What was that? Harry turned his head. Just a bit of Russian battle magic. What it lacks in finesse, it makes up in sheer destruction. I see. The agent struggled to keep his composure. Interesting spell. Would you like to move on to the last part of the tour, or would you like to get in a bit more practice? Might as well move on, Harry shrugged. Though it was great to use your firing range, I'll have to get one of my own someday. Quite. The agent smiled. He was starting to understand Black's sense of humor. The last section is the memorial wall. It has the name of every agent that has lost their life while on duty. I see. Harry nodded, becoming solemn. Let me go pay my respects, and then we can go back to my hotel. I don't think I'll be in the mood to talk after seeing that. I understand, the agent nodded. The wall is right this way. Harry spent several minutes staring at the names and wondering if there might be something similar in Britain that he might be able to look at. May they rest in peace. Absent companions, the agent agreed, handing Harry a bit of string. It will activate when you say the word hotel. It was a pleasure having you here, Mr. Black. It was a pleasure coming, Harry nodded. Hotel? Harry arrived in the lobby of his hotel and immediately walked into the elevator. After pressing the button for his floor, he closed his eyes and began to wait. Moments before reaching his floor, he heard a faint sound that sounded suspiciously like "die." Opening his eyes, he looked around the close suspiciously and assured himself that he was still alone and it had all been his imagination. Below him, the second group of Death Eaters had fallen to their death in the elevator shaft. They would not be found until the smell alerted the authorities that something was wrong. Report, the Chief of Magical Law Enforcement ordered. Yes, sir, the agent that had escorted Harry around the building agreed. When Black arrived, he asked about the wards and commented that there were several holes in them that would allow entry by even half-trained foes. I offered to show him the prison and he declined, saying that he wanted to get something to eat first. We went to the cantina and chatted about some of the new advances that were made to the wards around the holding cells. Black checked his watch and suggested that we go see them. I might also note that Black's appetite vanished after looking at his watch, and he left half of his sandwich. We went to the cells, and a group of Death Eaters poured it in. Black didn't even blink when one of them cast a spell at him. So, it looks like he was expecting them, the chief chuckled. And if we asked him, I'm sure he'd note that it was such an odd coincidence that a group of half-trained Death Eaters arrived right after he mentioned that our wards were so thin. Do you think he arranged to have them poured in, sir? The agent asked with a look of shock. No, the older man shook his head. Our questioning has shown that they were ordered to go on this mission by the Dark Tosser himself. I doubt that Black has the pull to arrange things like that. On the other hand, I find it very likely that he has spies in the ranks of the Death Eaters who told him the time that the attack was going to come. I understand, sir, the agent nodded. After that, we went to the firing range and Black vaporized one of the targets with an unknown spell. He mentioned that it was Russian battle magic, but none of the identifying spells managed to get anything. What did they get? Nothing, sir. The agent shook his head. And the forensics team that we sent in afterwards couldn't even find evidence that there had been any magic used. Interesting, the older man nodded. Go on. After that, we visited the memorial to the fallen and Black left. I see. The older man nodded. We really need to find a way to thank Black. I want a dozen teams sweeping my office and the minister's office for bugs. Yes, sir. Why, sir? I've been arguing with the minister that we needed the funds to finish our wards for months. The old man snorted. And he's been telling me that there was no need and that the temporary wards would have to do. He's also been wondering about the expense of the new cells and if we really even need them. Imagine the look on his face when I tell him that a team of Death Eaters managed to break through his good enough wards, and it was only the fact that Mr. Black happened to be there that they were subdued. I can't wait to add that the useless and expensive holding cells proved to be vital in the suppression, and that if it weren't for them and Black, then a dozen bloodthirsty dark wizards would be in the center of the law enforcement building with only a few clerks between them and the secure link to the minister's office. You're going to tell him that they were after him? The agent fought hard to suppress his laughter. I might hint that they were on an assassination mission and that ministry policy prevented us from naming their intended target. The old man gave an evil grin. Sometimes I love my job. Crucio, 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 Crucio dash. The Dark Lord was not happy, and when the Dark Lord wasn't happy, he tended to spread it around. What do you mean the two teams we sent after Black have disappeared? Crucio. I'm sorry, Master. Wormtail wet himself again. Black must have been too powerful. Powerful? I'll show him powerful. The Dark Lord screamed. Bella, take your husband and brother-in-law and show him what it means to anger the Dark Lord. I want him begging for death. Yes, my lord, the insane woman smiled. Thy will be done. Harry had about an hour lazing around his room when he decided to get something to drink. Grabbing a handful of loose change from the table next to his bed, he walked out of his room and down the hall to the drink machine. Feeding several coins into the slot, he was rewarded with several cans of his favorite beverage. As he was walking away, he heard a terrible thumping sound from the machine behind him. Forcing himself not to turn around, Harry walked slowly back to his room and picked up his phone to call the front desk. Front desk. Harry kept his voice calm. This is Black. I think there might be something wrong with the drink machine down the hall from my room. I heard it make a terrible sound after I got my drinks. Hanging up the phone, Harry opened his drink and took a sip. Things were looking up. Nothing strange had happened to him since he had come to Austria, and the front desk had assured him that drink machines occasionally made odd noises, and that they would send someone to check on it anyway. Down the hall, the drink machine continued to leak blood. The Lestranges were no more. 19. Back on the home front. Yes. The old woman peered suspiciously from the crack of a partially open door. Mrs. Longbottom? A man in oddly formal robes asked. My name is Hans Schisler. I'm the legal officer to the Austrian embassy, and I have a gift for you and your grandson. I suppose that you can prove that you are who you say you are, and that this isn't a trick to kill my grandson?" The old woman palmed her wand. "It was a very near thing in the last war, and I'm not going to allow another chance at him." "I understand, madam." The man handed over some official paperwork. "I'm also willing to hand over my wand for the duration of our meeting should that be a requirement to have a meeting." "That won't be necessary." The old woman stepped back and opened the door to allow entrance. "Please come in." "Thank you, ma'am," the man nodded, holding out a large brown envelope. "On behalf of the nation of Austria and its magical citizens, I am pleased to present this to you on behalf of your grandson." "What are these?" Neville's gran asked with a frown as she examined the contents of the envelope. "They look like photos of a bunch of oars mopping up a puddle of red paint. Forensics have determined that the red paint in those photos are all that remains of the Lestranges." The wizard grinned. "I wish that my department could take the credit, but I'm afraid that all we did was the clean-up." "You're certain that they're dead?" The woman's hands began to shake. "Please tell me that you are absolutely certain." 100% sure," Hans nodded. "They are dead. The monsters that did such terrible things to your family have been eliminated." "Thank you." The old woman refused to take her eyes off the gruesome photos.
"Who did this?"
"They were the fourth team of Death Eaters sent to kill a man named Black during his visit to Austria." Hans fought to keep his expression neutral. "One of them he captured and turned over to magical law enforcement, and the two others he eliminated in less creative ways. For some reason, he seems to have been annoyed at the Lestranges." "Black." The old woman paused. That was Bellatrix's maiden name. "Why would a Black want to do something like this to one of their own?" "This Black may not be related," Hans shrugged. "Reports say that he's killed a number of Death Eaters around Europe. He also virtually eliminated Germany's blood purists." "I see." The old woman nodded. "I suppose that it could also be a man who likes to follow the old customs." "What customs would those be?" Bellatrix was like a mad dog. The old woman's face twisted into a smile. "And it's said that it's a man's responsibility to shoot his own dog. One does not abandon that responsibility to someone else. It's not something that should be farmed out." Some families used to believe the same, that it was their responsibility to kill any one of their members when on a rampage. "I wouldn't be surprised if your idea had merit, ma'am." Hans nodded respectfully. "Rumor has it that Mr. Black is old, very old." "I see." The old woman nodded. "If you'll excuse me, I'm afraid that there are matters that I must attend to personally. And I really must be getting back to the embassy." Hans nodded, taking the hint. "Goodbye, madam. May fortune smile upon your house." "Thank you." Neville's gran escorted the man to the door and watched him leave. She then turned and walked back into the house and threw a handful of floo powder into her fireplace. "Alastair, I need to speak with you." "What is it, Augusta?" The scarred man's face came into view. "Do you need something?" "They're dead." The old woman's face lit up. "All three of them are dead. What happened?" Moody's face became expressionless. "Did you do something?" "No." The smile refused to leave her face. "They went up against a wizard named Black, and he killed them all. A representative from the Austrian embassy brought me pictures." "Black." Moody's eyebrows shot up. "Could you show me those pictures?" "If you like," the woman agreed. "But I'm going to want them back. I'm thinking of having them framed." "It's not healthy to live in the past like this, Augusta," Moody sighed. "I could say the same thing to you, Alastair," the old woman retorted. "Take the photos, but bring them back." "I will, Augusta." Moody nodded, taking the envelope. "Goodbye, Alastair." "Goodbye, Augusta." Moody stepped away from the fire and spent several moments looking through the photographs. "Guess he was feeling creative," Moody mumbled to himself. Any further thoughts were cut short by another face in the fireplace. "Moody, are you there?" Remus's asked cautiously. "I'm here," the old orer confirmed. What do you need? We've got an emergency meeting, the werewolf replied calmly. Snape has something that he wants to share. All right, Moody nodded. If you'll get your head out of my fireplace, then I'll be right there. Moody stepped through the fireplace and let his roving eye search for threats. What's all this about then? Severus has something he'd like to tell us. Dumbledore smiled. With your permission, I'd like to hear it. Fine. Moody took a seat. Severus? Dumbledore smiled. The Lestranges have disappeared. Snape didn't bother to stand up. The Dark Lord is furious, and he's been taking it out on the new recruits. Moody began to chuckle, but it's not what they expected when they joined up. Alaster, please. Dumbledore tried to defuse the situation. This is important. We have to start investigating. Don't bother, Moody interrupted. They're dead. Are you sure? Dumbledore lost his grandfatherly look and became dead serious. Sure as I can be with the information I have right now. Moody opened the envelope and dropped a couple of the photographs on the table. This is what they look like now. What happened? Dumbledore stared at the photos in horrified shock. Black. Moody replied calmly. They went after him, and my guess is that he wasn't too happy about that. I see. Dumbledore nodded. Do you know where Mr. Black is right now? I have a pretty good idea. Moody nodded. Why? I'd like you to get a look at him. Maybe even talk to him. Dumbledore gestured down at the photographs. I don't like knowing so little about a man that's capable of doing this. I can't. Moody held up his hand. I said can't not won't. I was talking to a friend in the Austrian ministry last night. I wanted to get an idea of what was happening, and my friend wouldn't tell me a thing. I've known her for 40 years, and the only thing I learned was that Black did something for them that put them in their debt. Do you have any idea what that might have been? Molly asked with a thoughtful frown. I have an idea, Moody nodded. But it's not something I can share with any of you. If you know, then you know why, and if you don't, then it's better you never know. Thank you, Alaster. Dumbledore spoke up. Does anyone else have anything to add? Luna. Father. 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 Luna. Father.
Lou.
I'm sorry, but it's just not the same without the ducks. I'm sorry, Father. Luna patted his arm sympathetically. But you know that the man at the shop won't sell us any more since the incident. I suppose, he sighed. Maybe if we were to get some geese? He told me that he won't sell any geese either. Luna frowned. Some people are just so narrow-minded sometimes. I know, and that's why I have another assignment for you. What is it, Father? Luna perked up. Did you finally get the location of the Great Missing Sock Depository? Or evidence of the underpants gnomes? No. Nothing so important, I'm afraid. Luna's father shook his head. I want you to do a few more human interest stories on Mr. Black. But, Father, Luna protested. I wanted a chance to report some real news. I know, dear. Her father nodded. But I'm afraid that I don't have any real news to report, and these human interest stories on Mr. Black have been quite popular. What did he do now, Father? Luna tried to look on the bright side. Did he discover evidence that another species exists? I'm afraid not. Luna's father shook his head. Just few groups of Death Eaters in Austria. I'll get right on it, Father. Luna nodded. Maybe if we got a picture of a duck? I'm afraid that we wouldn't be able to pull off the big dance number at the end then, he sighed. But I'm sure we'll think of something. Ambushed and killed, you say? The man behind the counter at the portkey shop asked with a frown. I'm afraid that your warranty doesn't cover that. The Dark Lord begs to differ. One of the younger Death Eaters tried to threaten. Really? The nerdy-looking man fought hard to suppress his laughter. Well, I suppose that if the Dark Lord begs, then it would be rude to disagree. That's right, the Death Eater nodded. People who disagree tend to disappear. Only what? I thought you people worked for the ministry? The portkey seller was having the time of his life. That's what you told me anyway. The Death Eater stammered. We do. The minister likes it when we refer to him as snarkboard. Snarkboards. The portkey seller frowned. Looked like all the deaths was affecting the quality of the recruits. I could have sworn you said Dark Lord. No. You must have misheard me. The Death Eater looked smug. I said snarkboard. Okay. The portkey seller shrugged. Why was there an ambush if you work for the ministries? Because the Death Eater stopped to think. Things were so hard now that the inner circle had been reduced. That's a ministry code word for accident. Oh, the portkey seller nodded. If it was an accident, then your warranty is valid. Do you have a receipt? Receipt? The Death Eater asked. What receipt? You need a receipt to get a full warranty, the shopkeep explained. Unless, of course, you're willing to take store credits. Yes, store credit. Okay, the shopkeeper nodded. I had some experimental charms I wanted to try anyway. What experimental charms? The Death Eater asked suspiciously. Oh, just a few charms I whipped up to keep you from dying in another bizarre and improbable accident. Oh, the Death Eater nodded. That's all right then. Just take him the letter Hedwig, Hermione pleaded. You saw me write it, so you know it doesn't have any tracking spells. The owl hooted sadly, but refused to move. Come on, Hedwig, Hermione. He tried to reason with the bird. I just want him to know that I'm worried about him, and Ron said that none of the other owls could find him. I know you could do it. The owl gave another melancholy hoot. I'm sorry, Hedwig. Hermione began stroking the owl's feathers. I didn't mean to imply that I thought you were deliberately shirking your responsibilities. I'm just worried about Harry, and it's making me say inconsiderate things. The owl gave a slightly less depressed-sounding hoot. Why don't we do some readings? Hermione suggested. I've got several new books on charms and defense against the dark arts. Why don't we look over those to see if there might be something we can use to help Harry when he comes back? Harry woke up late the next morning and started to pack. Austria was great and nothing odd or dangerous had happened, but he was starting to think that it was time to move on. While staying in one place for the remainder of his vacation was tempting, he couldn't force himself to stay when there were still new places to see and things to do. After all, it wasn't like he was going to have an opportunity to do this later in life. Shouldering his pack, Harry took one last look around the room and smiled. It was nice to have a chance to relax and enjoy the peace for a change. He had no doubt that his next destination would not be so sedate. Ah well, he could still hope for the best. 20. Hungarian Horntails. If I've told you once, I've told you 1,000 times, the professor shouted as he and his assistant walked out of their hangar. Pink is not a good color for our Zeppelin. But I like pink, Hench Girl shouted back. And if I can't have pink, then I want green. There will be no... The professor's tirade was cut off by the sound of several people clearing their throats. What do you want? We just wanted to discuss the fact that you've decided to use Tesla disk turbines to power that dirigible of yours. The figure brandished a large pipe menacingly. We think it might be a good idea if you were to rethink that. Yeah, one of the other figures agreed. People who power dirigibles with Tesla disk turbines suffer accidents around here. My good fellows, the professor began, somewhat annoyed that his argument with his hench girl had been interrupted. I would never dream of powering a dirigible with a Tesla disk turbine. Why, the very idea is pure insanity. Then what do you have in that hangar? The first figure asked sarcastically. Sure looks like a dirigible to me. Ah, a common mistake. The professor nodded. That's not a dirigible. It's a Zeppelin. Oh, the first figure nodded. Then we have no beef with you. Unless... Henchgirl echoed. Unless you're planning to arm it with Sten guns, the second figure finished. If you are... Why would we do something as silly as that? Henchgirl was appalled. What do you take us for? We're sorry for the mix-up. The first figure gave an unseen smile. "Good luck with your Zeppelin." "Thank you," the professor and henchgirl replied. "What pleasant fellows," the professor remarked. "I thought so," henchgirl agreed. "Now, as I was saying, if I can't have pink, then I want green." "You'll get no such thing," the professor shouted. "Silver is what Zeppelins were, and silver is what ours shall be." Harry walked out of his hotel and spent several hours wandering around the magical sections of Vienna before wanderlust forced him to find a place to purchase transportation to his next destination. "Good afternoon," the shopkeeper nodded. "What can I do for you?" "I was hoping to get a port key to Hungary," Harry shrugged. "I was told that I might be able to get something here." "I'm afraid that arranging a port key to Hungary is quite impossible," the shopkeeper held up his hand. "Not because I am trying to withhold it, but because of the protections that the Hungarians have raised around their country." "What happened?" Harry made himself comfortable. "As you may know, Hungary is a country that has suffered many trials." The shopkeeper sighed. After the First Great War, the Muggle powers decided to slice it into several smaller nations as punishment for having the poor luck of choosing the losing side. "What does that have to do with today?" Harry asked with a curious frown. A cabal of wizards managed to get word of the impending shift and decided to do what they could to save as much of their territory as they possibly could. The shopkeeper gave an evil smile. All was going well for the mostly French teams of wizards that were involved in shifting the borders and collecting war reparations until one day a team ported in and found themselves far off the mark. "I know the feeling of having to adjust to a bad port," Harry nodded. "It's not pleasant." What was worse, the old shopkeeper smirked, was that they could not get any form of magical transportation to work. It seems that a group of wizards calling themselves the Bewildered Brigades had put up wards around their remaining borders, sealing them from any means of magical transportation. What happened next? Harry leaned forward. "I have a hard time believing that the various wizarding governments would just give up." "You're right," the old shopkeeper nodded. "They didn't give up, and time has shown that the wizards in the first group were the lucky ones." The next several groups found themselves in a cavern with several large and rather angry Hungarian horntails. Most subsequent travelers have met similar fates. I believe that the last man ended up in the Bermuda Triangle after being repeatedly obliterated. They're still worried about something that happened almost 100 years ago? Harry asked incredulously. "No," the shopkeeper shook his head. "That was only the beginning. It gets worse. Much worse." They managed to keep the outside world at bay until the Second Great War, when again their country was threatened by outside forces. After the war, it seemed for a time that things might be looking up until it became clear to all that the Soviet liberators had no intention of leaving the country. This led up to the revolt of 1956. What happened? The people revolted against the Soviet-controlled government and managed to throw them out for a short amount of time. Unfortunately, resistance was crushed when the Soviet army marched into the country. The old shopkeeper gave a sad sigh. The magical community refused to stand by and was active in resisting the Soviet attack and helping several people escape. All was going well until the Committee for State Security arrived, bringing with them several teams of loyal wizards. What followed was a war between Bewildered Brigades and KGB wizards. On the plus side, the war had the unintended consequence of keeping most of the old Soviet Union's most effective magical teams pinned down in one area. On the minus, it ensured that the Bewildered Brigades would have ample reason to be worried about foreign wizards. Wow. Harry shook his head. They don't sound like very friendly people. That's not quite correct. The shopkeeper shook his head. The non-magical people are some of the friendliest in the world. It's only the magical people are a bit paranoid. Is it still possible to visit? Harry asked with a frown. I would rather not impose on people that would just like to be left alone. It's still possible if you are willing to speak to a representative from one of the Bubejos brigades and assure them that you have no intention of conquering their country. They might also want to know why you are visiting. That's fine, Harry nodded. How do I do that? Just get to Budapest, and someone will come to investigate, the shopkeeper smirked. I'll be sure to warn them of your arrival so they're not too jumpy when you show up. They're not very happy about magical people dropping by, so I guess I'll have to arrange some form of muggle transportation then, Harry shrugged. Do you know where I can arrange that? Yes, the shopkeeper nodded. Avala Eurocity leaves from Westbahnhof around 10 or 11, and you're at Budapest by 1 o'clock, or you could do something a bit unusual. Like what? Vienna and Budapest were once the twin capitals of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and for that reason there are many houses and shops that existed in both cities. The shopkeeper waved his hand to a door in the back of the shop. Most of them have been sealed up, but some of them remain serviceable. Sounds great. Harry nodded enthusiastically. Thank you. Just go down the street to the for sale bar. It's just over the bridge in front of the Geller Hotel. There is a restaurant upstairs that serves an excellent goulash soup. I'll tell them to meet you there. Thank you. Harry smiled as he stepped through the indicated door. No, Harry, the shopkeeper spoke softly to avoid being heard. Thank you for what you're going to do for us. Harry walked out of the door and immediately came face to face with an old rusted-out Russian tank, evidence that the conflict over who would control Hungary's magical sections was fought with both magical and non-magical forces. Looking at it sadly, he continued up the street toward the location of his meeting. How may I help you? A man greeted Harry as he entered the bar. I need a table, Harry replied immediately. I have to meet someone, so I'll need at least 2 seats. Yes, sir, the man nodded. Will you require anything else? Yes, Harry nodded. I've been told that your goulash is excellent, so bring up a bowl if it's not too much trouble. Not a problem, sir, the man nodded. I'll take care of it. Harry took a seat and was halfway through his soup when he was joined by a beautiful woman. Name? The woman asked coldly. Black MS? Morosi, Maricine Varga Catalan. She replied with no hint of warmth in her voice. Purpose of your visit? Tourism. Inwardly, Harry shrugged. If she didn't want to be friendly, then he wasn't going to make the effort. I wanted to do some sightseeing while I was here. What do you plan to do and see? The woman regarded him suspiciously. And where do you plan to go after this? I don't know. I'm told that there are some wonderful forests here. I wouldn't mind getting a look at some of your dragons if that's possible. After this, Harry took a moment to think. I don't have any solid plans, so maybe. Crimea. Why do you wish to view the dragon breeding areas? The woman became absolutely still as she waited for his answer. I like dragons, Harry smiled. And I've spent quite a bit of time around them. They're wonderful creatures, and I think that it would be marvelous to see them in their home ranges. I see. She relaxed, having finally divined the reason for a visit by the mysterious Mr. Black. Then I would suggest that you make your visit soon. It would be unfortunate if you were to delay your visit too long. Thank you, Harry smiled. Do I need any sort of pass? No. The woman pulled out a piece of paper and wrote a quick note. But if you give them this note, it will make your visit go much smoother. Thank you, Harry smiled. Would you like something to eat? My treat. Thank you, but no, the woman smiled. Just visiting the dragons as soon as you possibly can will be thanks enough for me. It will be the first thing I do after I find myself a hotel room, Harry promised. Thank you for the help and have a nice day. What a nice woman, Harry mused to himself as he finished his soup. Going to all that trouble to make sure I visit the dragons. She must really be fond of the beasts. Getting up, Harry paid for his meal and walked the short distance to the Gellert Hotel. May I help you, sirs? The man behind the desk asked with a raised eyebrow. I'd like to get a room, Harry replied. The best in the hotel if it's available. Right away, misters? Black, Harry smiled. And after I check in, I need to go out for a while. So is it possible to leave my room key with the front desk? Of course, sir. The man nodded. If you like, you can leave your luggage here, and I'll have someone put it in your room. That way you can go about your business while we get everything ready. Sounds perfect. Harry nodded. Thank you. We try to take care of our guests. The desk man smiled. Will there be anything else, sirs? No. Harry shook his head. Just let me get one thing for my pack, and I'll be on my way. Very good, sir. The desk man turned away and returned to his paperwork. Harry rummaged around his pack for a few minutes before finding his guidebook, and after one long look around the hotel lobby, he made his exit. Harry walked back to the magical section of town and found a place to sit. Flipping through his guidebook, he soon found the section on Hungarian horntails. The Hungarian horntail is one of the most recognizable of the dragon family. Its black scales and bronze horns make it easy to identify, and the market for black dragon hide has exploded since the emergence of the Dark Lord Grabhold, who dressed his followers in dark colors in defiance to the previous tradition, which had the Dark Lord dressed in purple and his followers dressed in pink. Deciding not to read any more about historic Dark Lord fashion trends, Harry closed his guidebook and walked into the nearest magical shop. How may I help you? The woman behind the counter asked with a frown. I wanted to go see the dragons. Harry smiled. Do you know how I could get to where the dragons are? I couldn't find anything in my guidebook, and I was hoping to get some directions. Not a problem, the woman smiled. I could arrange a portkey if you'd like. That would be great. Harry nodded. Thank you. You might wish to look around while I make the arrangements. The woman gestured towards a corner of the store. I think I might have some books on dragons over there if you're interested. Thank you. Harry headed towards the indicated corner and began browsing. Harry returned to the counter with an armload of books and a grin on his face. Have you got the portkey ready yet? Yes, I do. The woman nodded. Quite a lot of books you got there. Yes. Harry looked down. I'm afraid I cleared out your entire stock. Not my entire stock. The woman began calculating the cost of Harry's purchases. I have a few things in the back that I don't show to the general public. Any chance of letting me see any of it? Harry asked with a grin. Sounds like something I'd like to add to my library. Depends. The woman gave a coy smile. What's your name? Black. Harry smirked. Mr. Black. I see. The woman gave a slow nod. Give me a minute to check the back. Sure. Harry smiled. Take all the time you need. The woman spent several minutes in the back room and emerged with a large box full of books. I brought all the books I had in the back. Not all of them are about dragons, I'm afraid. They are all quite interesting, though. That's fine. I'll take them all. Harry shrugged. Are they safe to shrink, or should I do something else? Use this. The woman pulled a small leather organizer. It has a rather long and confusing name, but I just call it a pocket dictionary. It's an antique. They were popular with travelers and pilgrims until international portkeys became so cheap and reliable. Sounds like a good gift for a friend of mine. Harry took the small item. Do you have another one of these? I'm afraid that I only have the one. The woman frowned. No one wants them anymore, and this is the only one I have left. I'm sure that you could have another made if you knew the right people. I suppose I do know the right people, Harry grinned. Does it have any drawbacks? It won't hold very many books, the woman shrugged. And I'm afraid that the weight reduction charms are rather primitive. I'll take it, Harry nodded. Do I have enough time to put the books in the organizer before the portkey activates? Of course, the woman nodded. I forgot to ask, do you want the portkey to return you here or to some other location? Could you get me back to my hotel? Harry asked hopefully. It's in a non-magical neighborhood. Not a problem, Mr. Black. The woman pushed over a small bronze dragon. Horntail will take you there and hotel will return you. Thank you. Harry paid for and pocketed his purchases. Horntail. Are you Mr. Black? A soot-covered man asked nervously. We've been told that a man named Mr. Black was coming. I am. Harry nodded. I guess you've been expecting me. I have. The man nodded. How much experience do you have with dragons? Not very much, I'm afraid, Harry admitted. I watched the hatch and later helped raise one, and I've had a bit more experiences with older dragons. Why? I was hoping you could help with what's been happening. The man's shoulders dropped. I guess that it was silly to get my hopes up like that. I may not have very much experience, Harry frowned. But I do know a couple of experts. I also have several books that we can look through before we call them in. Wonderful. The man regained some of his enthusiasm. Do you want to look at them now? Or would you like to hear what's been happening? Why don't you tell me what's been going on first? Harry replied calmly. Then we can look at the dragons. It all started a few months ago when I noticed one of the larger males seemed sluggish. The man took a deep, calming breath. He got worse and his scales began to dull. We isolated him from the others, but by then it was too late. At this time, every one of the dragons are showing signs of the sickness. Let's go take a look at them. Harry took a deep breath. Do you have any idea what they're supposed to look like under mage sight? I'm afraid I don't. The man shook his head. Why? Because the only thing I can do aside from flip through these books is look at them under mage sight. Harry shrugged. I don't have many talents, but I do have a few. Maybe one of the books will have something. The man gave a hopeful grin. So, why don't we flip through them first? Good idea, Harry nodded. You take this stack and I'll take the other. And with luck, one of us will find something. The man nodded. The two of them spent several hours going through the books, Harry going slow and making the occasional note. The other man quickly flipping through the books and occasionally making in-depth reads and rereads of new information. I've found nothing. The man tossed down the last book in disgust. Did you perhaps find something? No quick answers. Harry shook his head. But I did find several diagnostic charms. With any luck, we'll be able to gather up enough information so that my friends can figure out what's wrong. I hope you're right, Mr. Black. The man forced himself to stand. If you're not, then I'm afraid that Hungary's hornetals will soon be no more. I promise that I will do everything I can to keep them alive. Harry put his books away. Now, let's go check the dragons. The two of them went through a long series of passages, finally emerging in a large cavern holding a large male dragon. Let me get to work. Harry set up a place to write and began to cast spells. After several minutes of furious note-taking, Harry activated his mage sight. I'm going to need green, blue, red, and pink ink. Right away, the man waved a hand, summoning the requested items. But why? Because those are the colors that showed up under mage sight for some reason. Harry shrugged. With any luck, the experts will know what this all means. Tell me something, Mr. Black. The dragon keeper looked down at Harry's notes with a smirk. Do these experts speak Magyar? I don't believe so. Harry's face screwed up in confusion. Why? Because that is the language you wrote your notes in. The dragon keeper chuckled. It's not a problem. Just tell me what language to have it translated into. Give me a moment and I'll do it myself. Harry grabbed a quill and began translating. I'm sorry, I didn't notice I was putting it in the wrong language. Not a problem, Mr. Black. The dragon keeper's smirk was firmly in place. I don't read English so well, so it's good to have it in my native language. Well, now you have it in both. Harry handed over the translated notes. I'll put out the call that you need some help with your dragons. Is there any way that you'd like them to contact you? Or would you rather they just come here? Tell them to contact the Bibejos Brigades, and when asked, have them tell the Bibejos Brigades that they're going to deal with the dragon problem. The dragon keeper smiled. That should solve the usual visa and entry problems. Thank you, Harry yawned. I've got to get back to my hotel. I'll try to get the ball moving before I get to sleep. Thank you, Mr. Black. The man waved his hands. Thank you for helping us deal with all of this. It's not a problem. Harry stifled another yawn. I just hope that things turn out okay, hotel. Harry arrived in an alley close to his hotel and forced himself to make the short walk at a quick pace. Welcome back, sir. The man at the front desk nodded. Here is your key. I'll have one of the bellhops lead you up. Thank you. Harry followed the bellhop up to his room. Here we are, sir. The bellhop opened the door and handed back the key. If you need anything, don't hesitate to call the front desk. Thank you. Harry tipped the man and pulled out his Zippo. Professor, are you there? I'm here, my friend. The professor's unique voice answered. What can I do for you? Is my portable floo connected to the normal floo network? Yes, it is. The professor gave an unseen nod. But I would be happy to make any calls for you. As tired as you sound, I think you should be getting to sleep soon. Sound fine. Harry gave another yawn. There is a problem with the dragons in Hungary. I've done what I can, and I was hoping to call in a couple of experts to look over my notes and find a solution. Who do you need me to contact? The first is a man named Charlie Weasley. Harry blinked hard. I'm not sure of his floo address, but I'm sure you can get it if you floo the borough in Ottery Street Catchpole. Charlie Weasley, borough. The professor repeated. Who else? The next is a man named Rubius Hagrid, usually just goes by the name of Hagrid. Harry stifled another yawn. He teaches care of magical creatures at Hogwarts, and he has experience with dragons. Try fooling Hogwarts to get in contact with him. Hagrid at Hogwarts, the professor agreed. Anyone else? One more thing. Harry struggled to keep his focus. How good is Henchgirl at brewing potions? One of the best, the professor answered immediately. Why? They might need some help with potions, and I'd rather have someone I trust providing it. Harry answered immediately. Unless you can think of anything else, then I'm going to bed. Good night, Mr. Black. The professor smiled. And goodbye. Goodbye. Harry replied. Henchgirl, Henchgirl. The professor screamed for his wayward assistant. Where are you?
What?
Henchgirl looked surly. I'm busy. Then I guess you don't want the chance to update your potions laboratory? The professor smirked. I'm sorry for disturbing you. Talk. Henchgirl was in no mood for games. I've been awake for the past 3 days, and I was looking forward to some rest. Yes, I'm well aware that you've received several back issues of Teen Witch Weekly or some such. It was Potions Quarterly. Henchgirl interrupted. But now is not the time to dwell on such things. The professor ignored her. Mr. Black feels that he may need some help from you with potions, so I think that it may be a good idea to get anything that you might conceive of needing after I sleep. Henchgirl nodded. Nothing can start happening for a few hours anyway, and I shouldn't be working until I get some rest. Quite right, the professor nodded. I didn't want to spring it on you later with no warning. Good night. Henchgirl yawned and went off in the direction of the bed. Good night, the professor replied as he walked toward the fireplace. Burrow. Yes. A young red-headed female answered the call. Can I help you? I was hoping to speak with your brother, the professor smiled. I believe that they might be able to help me with a problem. Not bothering to ask what brother the odd little man wanted, Ginny pulled her head out of the fireplace and called out. Fred, George, there's a strange man flooing you. After all, none of her normal brothers would be getting a floo from such an odd little man. "What can," one twin began. "We do for you," the other finished. "I am the professor," the little man replied proudly. "And Mr. Black has asked me contact a man named Charlie Weasley about a problem in Hungary involving dragons." "Mr. Black?" one twin asked in surprise. "Charlie?" the other agreed. "We'll do what we can. Do you have some way that Charlie can contact you?" "Here." The professor handed a small object through the flames. "There are directions engraved on the side. Just tell him to call for the professor."
You
"Invented this?" Fred finished. "Would you mind taking a look at some of our work?" George smiled hopefully. "I'm always happy to help out a pair of burgeoning inventors." The professor smiled, handing through 2 more small objects. "Call me in a few days after everything has calmed down with the dragons." "Think." "You, Professor." "Anytime." The professor gave one last smile before ending the call. Thank you for joining us for part 2 of Make a Wish by Rorschach's Blot. With each twist and turn, we see how far Harry is willing to go to achieve his heart's desires, but at what cost? If you're just as hooked as we are, make sure to leave a like and comment below to let us know your thoughts. Your feedback keeps the magic alive. Before we sign off, here are a couple of magical facts to brighten your day. In the wizarding world, the idea of wish magic isn't as innocent as it seems. It's believed that wishes, when granted, tend to come with unexpected consequences. It's a reminder that sometimes the things we desire most can come with a price we're not ready to pay. Did you know that there's an ancient legend of a magical well known as the Well of Wishes? It's rumored to be able to grant the deepest desires of the heart, but only to those who are willing to sacrifice something in return. Could it be that Harry's wish is a modern echo of this ancient concept? Part 3 is just around the corner, and if you want it to arrive faster, don't forget to like this video and leave 10 comments, and we'll release the next part sooner than expected. Your engagement means the world to us and helps bring you more stories to fall in love with. Be sure to subscribe and ring the notification bell so you never miss an update. Thank you for being a part of the Grimoire Audiobooks family. Until next time, stay magical, and we'll see you in the next chapter.